Chief Martinez, welcome.
Hi, Counselor.
I should say hi to Councilors Campbell and Braden as well.
Hi, Counselor.
Hi.
I'm just waiting for Councillor Flaherty is the chair of the council's COVID recovery committee, and so I'm sort of treating him as a vice chair today. So I'm just waiting for Michael, and then we'll get going.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair. Can you hear me?
Yep, can hear you great. Thanks, Councillor Flaherty. And with you here, I think we're going to get going. Chief Sterrett, do we have everybody on your side? Okay, great.
Yes, I believe so.
And I assume central staff, we're good?
We're all set to go, Madam Chair.
Great, excellent. I'm calling this hearing of the Boston City Council's Ways and Means Committee to order. For the record, my name is Kenzie Bach. I'm the District 8 Councilor and also the chair of the Council's Ways and Means Committee. This public hearing is being recorded and live streamed at boston.gov/city-council-tv. It will be rebroadcast on Xfinity Channel 8, RCN Channel 82, and Verizon Fios Channel 964. We will be taking public testimony at the end of this hearing. If you wish to testify via video conference, please email shane.pack@boston.gov. That's shane.pac@boston.gov to sign up. And we do ask that when you testify, you just state your name and affiliation and try to limit your comments to 2 to 3 minutes, just to make sure that all comments can be heard. You can also, if you're not able to join us in the Zoom or you watch this afterwards, you can send us written testimony by emailing ccc.wm@boston.gov. That stands for City Council Committee on Ways and Means, so ccc.wm@boston.gov. Today's hearing is on docket 0687, message and order authorizing the City of Boston to accept and expend the amount of $50 million in the form of a grant awarded by the United States Department of the Treasury to be administered by the City of Boston's Chief Financial Officer, Collector Treasurer, made from the Coronavirus State and Local Fiscal Recovery Fund in the Treasury of the United States, established by Section 9901 of the American Rescue Plan Act of 2021, also known as ARPA. I'm pleased to be joined today by Councillor Michael Flaherty, who is the chair of the council's newly formed COVID-19 Recovery Committee that our President Pro Tempore, Matt O'Malley, put together. And although this docket is in Ways and Means because we're in an ongoing budget process, and so we want to have a continuous conversation about all of the pockets of funding that we're authorizing this June. It is Councillor Flaherty's committee that is going to be sort of taking the baton on July 1 and really doing oversight on a continuing basis on this funding. And so he's kind of also in a leadership capacity here today in this hearing. And then we're also joined by my colleagues, Councillor Andrea Campbell of District 4, Councillor Liz Braden of District 9, and Councillor Julia Mejia at large. And on the administration side, I'm grateful we have a range of major leaders in the city with us today. Mr. Justin Sterrett, our CFO, Selena Barrios-Milner, our Chief of Equity and Inclusion, Marty Martinez, our Chief of Health and Human Services, Sheila Dillon, our Chief of Housing and Director of Neighborhood Development, and Midori Morikawa, our Chief of Economic Development. So grateful to all of them for making the time. And I know that towards the end of the hearing, we'll also hear from some important community advocates. Before we turn it over to the administration, I want to make some opening remarks just by way of context for folks watching at home. And then I'll pass it over, as I mentioned, to Councillor Michael Flaherty, the chair of the Council's COVID-19 Recovery Committee. And then I'll allow councillors here to just make brief statements. I would just ask folks to keep them brief because we do have, there's quite a bunch of different buckets to cover today. And I'm grateful to the administration for the information they've sent over to us in advance on that front. I want to note we've also just been joined by President Matt O'Malley, the councilor for District 6 and our president pro tempore. So just to start, a little bit of context. So folks have probably heard by now about the American Rescue Plan, which was passed at the federal level in mid-March. And one of the things that included, in a very much to our appreciation, because it wasn't true of some of the earlier bills that we saw under the Trump administration, it included some general funding to support cities and towns. And that's really important because our local economies have been hard hit by the pandemic. And there's lots of just general revenue that's been lost. And while it was really important to have the CARES funding that we had through the pandemic for kind of immediate pandemic related issues, I think that we all know that a lot of pandemic related issues have been big picture economic issues, and also that the pandemic has exposed a lot of structural societal issues that we have. And so having our hands tied with how we can use the federal funding has been challenging in prior rounds of federal funding. And what was passed by the Biden administration is something with a lot more scope as we really think about building the city of Boston back better. And it includes, between the allocation directly to the city of Boston and the pass-through allocation for Suffolk County, about $500 million of kind of general funding. Now, half of that doesn't come for another year. But you're talking about the first half right now. But that's money to be spent over kind of a 3 to 4 year period. And so both the council and the mayor, are kind of looking at this funding and trying to balance a bunch of different things. So one of the things that we're dealing with is kind of immediate need, right? The fact that we are still in the COVID crisis, we are still doing testing, we are still doing vaccines, we've still got folks who are sick, and that's a really important ongoing set of work. We've also got this immediate need for economic recovery. And a desire to kind of stimulate that, and to stimulate it in ways that specifically really reach our residents, right? Make sure our residents are getting jobs and opportunity and economic help and rental stabilization and all these things. Then there's the fact that this money is available to us for 4 years because of the backwards looking nature of the city of Boston's main financial base, which is property tax. We have reason to think that some substantial economic impacts of the pandemic have not hit us fully yet and will hit future budgets of the city of Boston. So we would be remiss not to hold some of this money so that we can handle those well and not have to cut basic city services on people in 18 months, right? So that is another piece. And then there are these big structural challenges that we face, and kind of thinking about this is a, never before, we hope not never again, but you certainly can't plan on it kind of federal disbursement. And so what are the kind of big structural things in our city that we could use some of this money and take a bit of a moonshot on? So I just want to articulate for the public that it's a lot of money, but we're dealing with kind of all of those different challenges. And the city council hears quite consistently from residents who are aware of this money and want to make sure it's being spent well in all those ways. And that's why our president pro tempore, Matt O'Malley, launched this new committee, COVID Recovery Committee, to really have oversight over that funding, steward that funding. And as I mentioned, it's being ably chaired by my colleague, Councillor Michael Flaherty, at large. And so while we're starting the scrutiny of that money in Ways and Means, because we're in an ongoing budget process, that's really going to transfer over. The initial proposal from the administration back in April, remember, this was mere weeks after the federal law had passed, was, well, why doesn't the council authorize that money? And then we're going to set up a coordinating committee of city departments and really look at how to spend this equitably and well. And I think the intention there was great and in line with what all of us want to see happen. But from the council's perspective, authorizing that much money without yet having a plan for it is a challenge from an oversight perspective, because we take seriously our role vis-a-vis kind of scrutinizing your tax dollars and as the appropriating authority. So I'm appreciative of the fact that, after conversation, what the administration did instead was convene a number of committees, and I'll let Chief Sterrett talk about this in more detail, but a number of departments internally to kind of have some of those conversations ahead of time about what are the real 3 to 6 month needs that we've got right now in the city. And, those bigger structural things are going to be an ongoing conversation that, frankly, you can't do in too much haste because you got to get it right. So it's a measure twice, cut once situation. But there are some really pressing things right now. And we want to make sure that the council and the administration are able to work together to get those done. So what's before us today is a $50 million appropriation request that's really carving out those kind of 3 to 6 month things. And we're going to have the chairs of the various sort of departments that would be executing on some of those things or passing through the funding to others like small businesses speak to us today about the necessity and kind of what they are proposing. Just so that councilors and others understand, there is also a need for American Rescue Plan funding to support the city's budget for FY22, because there has in fact been significant revenue loss from the pandemic. That authorization will be a separate authorization. That's not what we're talking about today. So we do expect a docket from the administration with the revised budget of a revenue source coming from the ARP funds, but that's not what we're talking about today. What we're talking about today is this kind of first tranche of like 3 to 6 month, more immediate stuff plans. So that's just a little bit of context from me about where we are, and just to recognize the fact that that the administration has adjusted the approach here in conversation with the council. And that's something that I, as the Ways and Means Chair, appreciate. And now I want to pass it to my colleague, Councillor Michael Flaherty, for some words as well, given his role in kind of chairing and continuing the scrutiny over these funds. So, Councillor Flaherty, you have the floor.
Very good. Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for hosting, and also to the members of the administration for being here today and testifying. And Chairwoman Bark did a great job outlining, so I will not belabor the point. Obviously, want to work together closely with my colleagues as well as with the administration and Acting Mayor Janey with respect to an equitable recovery. So that said, I just have 3 sort of basic questions or premises of which, who is going to be part of the city's Equitable Recovery Coordinating Committee? So I need the names of those individuals. When will the citywide engagement process begin? I'd like to get a sense as to the date when that process will start. And also, how does the acting administration intend to coordinate and partner with the Boston City Council in that effort? And then lastly, this is probably more to Chief Dillon. Can you just provide me some greater detail about the affordable housing and navigation services and what that entails? So that said, looking forward to this hearing and working closely with everyone to make sure that we're putting our best foot forward and we're moving our city forward after the pandemic. So thank you, Madam Chair, for your time and attention.
Great. Thank you so much, Councillor Flaherty. I think that actually, just for to streamline our conversation and make it the most effective, I'm going to ask the administration to present now, and then I'll go to the rest of my council colleagues so that comments can be combined with questions, just so that we get right into the substance of the thing. I will note that we've also been joined by Councillor Frank Baker of District 3 and Councillor Anissa Asabi George at large. And now I'll go over to Chief Sterrett to open us up.
Thank you, Councillor. And if it's okay with you, I'm going to share my screen.
Yep, sounds good.
Is that coming up for folks?
Yes, although we're still in. Yeah, there we go.
How's that? Great. So thank you, Councillor Bach, and thank you, Councillor Flaherty, for the opening comments. Really do appreciate the collaborative nature and honestly the evolution that you outlined, Councillor, from our original thinking. Obviously, this is an evolving topic with interim guidance and different iterations and different funding sources that we're still learning from every single day. I want to thank my fellow chiefs who are here on the call, who have been sort of instrumental in really a unique model that we've built out as part of sort of the mayor's approach to sort of allocating this funding and thinking about allocating this funding, really taking a comprehensive citywide approach, not just focusing right on the A&F cabinet or the budget office. And I do want to give a special shout out to Casey Brock Wilson, who has been sort of instrumental in helping staff up and provide a lot of the background support for this effort. This is a $50 million pot of money that we're talking about. But it's a tremendous amount of work, along with the mayor's office, along with every cabinet staff who have been working on this to get us here today. So I will not dive into many more details than what you mentioned, Councillor. You did a great job, I think, outlining where we've come. I do just want to highlight a few areas and actually answer, I think, some of Councillor Flaherty's questions as we think about it. But just to give you a little bit of context for money. So as you mentioned, we've already sort of gone through the CARES Act. We've already gone through a lot of the conversations around the coronavirus relief bill, which was the last previous federal administration's bill in December of 2020. And today we're really here talking about the American Rescue Plan. And even within the American Rescue Plan, we are really just talking about this highlighted bucket of money for the city, which is a $500 million plus estimate. Again, as you mentioned, over the 5 fiscal years that we will be getting as a city for local support in a couple of different categories. So just to give people some context, $424 million of that money is coming directly from the federal government to the city. About 3 weeks ago, we got about half of that money, about $212 million as a half of a down payment on that. We are expecting to get additional funding, upwards of potentially another $100 million total from the state, but that is funding that is funneled basically that would have gone to Suffolk County if it had existed as a governmental entity, but because it does not, the funding goes to the state and then will be routed to us, and we are in conversations with them and are awaiting the release of that funding. Folks may have seen that there's obviously continued conversations going on between the legislature and the governor around that funding. So we will wait to hear from them on when that funding is coming out. But with that said, today we're really focused on a small portion, about 10% of this entire $500 million plus that we are requesting to accept and expend today around really what you mentioned, Councillor Bach, around emergency assistance as it relates to COVID-19 response. And that is work that Chief Martinez and others will be discussing a little bit later around vaccinations and testing and all that good stuff, as well as really a broad swath of other chiefs, whether it's Chief Dillon, Chief Morikawa, Chief Barrios Milner, around recovery and how do we come back better, both from an economic development perspective, but also an equity perspective, and targeting folks who have been most impacted by COVID-19. As you mentioned, this funding can be spent over the next 5 years, 5 fiscal years, December 2024. So we're really just focused on a small portion, about 10% of that funding today. You did mention, again, Councillor, the other portion that we will be talking about with the council shortly, and which we've already started a conversation on, is using the ARP as part of the city's operating budget. We proposed back in April to use potentially up to $100 million. We'll be finalizing that number now that we've gotten some additional guidance from the feds on what the revenue replacement calculations are that we should be using. So we look forward to coming back to the council in the next couple of weeks for that separate order. On the ARP, the local aid funding, the federal government released 6 categories of funding. We're really only focused on the top 3 categories for today's conversation. I will quickly run through the bottom 3 categories, which are areas of definitely interest and definitely areas that we know we will be making investments in the future with partnership with the council once we've solicited some feedback from the community and certainly from the council and from anybody interested in it, is around water and sewer infrastructure as well as broadband infrastructure. Those are 2 big buckets, but they require a fair amount of lead time when it comes to actually finding programs and finding scalable solutions that we can use this funding to invest in. So definitely looking forward to a larger conversation about those 2 buckets. I mentioned we'll be coming back to the council to talk about revenue replacement for the city's operating budget, which we have started to talk about and we'll talk about with the council over the next month. And today's conversation is really focused on these top 3 categories. 1, supporting the public health response. 2, addressing the negative economic impacts of COVID-19. And finally, 3, and a lot of credit to the Biden administration as well as the delegation certainly and Congress, is a bucket of funding really targeted around equity, especially as it relates to hardest hit communities. Now, the way they define that is using census tracts. So we've been really working closely with our partners with the BPDA as well as others in City Hall and the city administration to sort of figure out what that looks like and start to think about that. And I will turn it over to Chief Barrios Milner and Marty Martinez to talk a little bit about how they're thinking about that resources. But before I do that, to answer your question, Councilor Flaherty, around what is the ERCC, what is this thing, and it really is a new approach that the mayor and the city is taking to thinking about this funding. Oftentimes, decisions and sort of discussion around finances can get centered very much in the A&F cabinet or the budget office, and we really wanted to broaden and diversify the voices that were being brought to the table from a city perspective when it comes to different areas of government. So that's why you have a steering committee headed up by, obviously, Chief Martinez, Chief Barrios Milner, obviously the mayor's office, and others who are really sort of trying to guide this work across a cross-functional group of cabinets throughout the city. And then it really does take a village to sort of raise this funding, to steal an expression from Hillary Clinton. One of the values that we really wanted to take into account is how do we make sure we're touching as many parts of city government and touching as many different groups of populations to touch this work and really make investments where we need it. We don't want to miss anything. We certainly don't want to duplicate any efforts. And because there are all these different buckets of money out there, we really needed a cross-functional approach to oversight and accountability from the city's perspective, or the administration's perspective, I should say, when it comes to this funding, to make sure we're spending it appropriately. In addition, we will be launching an external advisory council. That'll be coming out in the next couple of weeks, Councilor. So we look forward to discussing that, as well as launching a comprehensive engagement strategy over the next couple of weeks to really think about the big picture moonshot ideas for the rest of the $400 million plus that we'll be thinking about as part of the future funding that we'll be getting in this resource. So definitely more to come on that, and definitely that'll be launching in the next couple of weeks. So with that, I am going to just quickly talk about what today's overall strategy was. And that's really focusing on this initial $50 million allocation from the ARP for community-based investments to support both the reopening of the city, but also its initial economic recovery. Again, this is about 10% of the total funding we'll be getting. As I mentioned, we're focusing on those top three categories, and the broad categories we've broken up, and then obviously shared a sort of supplemental memo on what the breakdown of this is even further, that any of the chiefs will be happy to talk about, I'm sure. But broadly speaking, it's about $10 million to support the public health response, certainly primarily through our partners with PHC, who have obviously done yeoman's work in the past 14 months, but certainly require additional support going forward. 10 million for communities and families most impacted by COVID-19. This was that third bucket of sort of targeted funding in specific neighborhoods and specific communities who have been disproportionately impacted by COVID-19. And then finally, I think the biggest category, and certainly touches a whole host of different segments, is 30 million to address negative economic impacts. This is everything from food access to arts funding to tourism funding, and then a big bucket of funding for small business relief, certainly around both commercial rent relief, but as well as small business support. So certainly we'll turn it over to the chiefs in a second to talk through those specific areas. I do want to mention that sort of other areas and other discussions that are going on. Many of you may have seen that the mayor announced a $50 million rental relief fund that is working right now. That was funded through other federal resources. Obviously, BPS and the school committee are going through their process right now for determining their $400 million worth of funding, which is a totally separate bucket of money. And then there are a whole bunch of other resources that are out there that are sort of going on their own tracks. And today we're really focused on this funding, and the guidance that was given to us from the feds to use that funding is where we're focused on. And then the last thing I'll just mention, as I said earlier, we'll be launching a citywide engagement process that we hope to bring as many voices into the process as possible, so that we can really try to dedicate these resources, obviously with the help of the council, to areas of the city that need it most. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Chief Barrios Milner to talk a little bit about the decision-making process that we went through. And Chief, feel free to just tag me and I'll move along on the slides.
Great, thank you so much. Thank you, Councilors Bach and Flaherty, for having this hearing today, and all the councilors that are here, Councilor O'Malley, Braden, Mejia, Campbell, Asaibi, George. I probably missed somebody because I don't have my slide in front of me, but thank you all for having this important conversation. Wanted to share with you the approach that we're taking for the emergency relief funds and the stimulus funds overall. We're driving all of our decision-making with an equity lens. And what that means is that we're going to prioritize the individuals and the neighborhoods, the industries and the sectors that have been most affected. We will be supporting the city as a whole, but we have to really take into account who has suffered the most impacts and who needs the most support so that we can get everyone back on the same level playing field, or at least better than when they started. So we'll be looking at people, and we'll be informed by both data and the community in terms of which groups have been most affected, and we'll have their input in the allocation and design of programming for the funds. We're going to support the most impacted neighborhoods. We'll be addressing key issues that are central to our, recovery as a city, as well as focusing in on most affected sectors. As you all know, Boston was one of the cities that suffered some of the highest rates of unemployment, because the very industries that make us who we are were the ones that suffered the most. And so we have to make sure that we build in the resiliency for those industries and the workers and the families that depend on those jobs. So to share for this initial round of funding, some of the input that we've had that helped shape the programming and the relief efforts that the city has offered from day one. We're highly informed by data. We have, at one point daily and now biweekly briefings from BPHC and BPDA on hardest hit industries, neighborhoods, and demographic groups. And we track that on a daily, and Chief Martinez would tell you, probably hourly basis. The data has really informed how we've responded and has allowed us to be nimble in our response. We've also been informed by the Health Inequities Task Force, which is made up of 26 representatives who've given over 100 hours in weekly meetings since April 11th, providing input and helping to ensure that their communities were accessing testing and now vaccines, and that their needs were being taken into account as the city was making decisions on relief and now recovery efforts. I also want to highlight the excellent work done by the Small Business Unit within Economic Development under Director Natalia Urtubey, who from March 10th has been leading surveys with small businesses in the Boston area and has held weekly calls to listen to their needs, point them to resources, guide them with guidance as it was evolving in real time. And we've heard from nearly 5,000 business owners through surveys that have allowed us to shape the funds that we've given, whether it was to have a PPE specific fund, to have a small business relief fund, then the commercial rent relief. These have all been informed by needs that were highlighted by small businesses that were not being met by any of the other federal and state funding sources. And so we're going to continue to be guided by the most impacted as we make decisions moving forward.
Thank you, Chief. And now I'm going to turn it over to four other chiefs or four chiefs to talk through, just at a very high level, some of the investments within those big buckets that we talked about, starting with Chief Martinez.
Thanks, Justin. And thank you, Councilor Bach and Councilor Flaherty, and the rest of the councilors for being here. I appreciate the opportunity to share a little bit about where these resources are going to within our front. As we continue to look to recover from what has been a devastating year on many fronts, public health is going to work to ensure we're able to continue to respond as needed to the crisis that is COVID. As I think Councilor Flaherty referenced, COVID may appear to be over to some, but it isn't for many of our residents. And so to not only do we need to continue to direct the response efforts that we need, but we also need to make sure that the resources are there to address the inequities that have been exacerbated by the pandemic. So these federal funds are going to allow us to ensure that we can finish the crisis response part of this work, and that's a key part of it. So we're going to allocate around $7 million to be able to do that in a couple buckets. Ongoing COVID testing support and capacity, both through mobile efforts and support for community health center efforts. It's important that we continue to make sure that there's testing availability and that we do that, especially as people want to move on. Testing for COVID will be a regular thing that we need to ensure has the capacity in the city to be able to do that over the next several months. We will also direct funding to support ongoing vaccine outreach, awareness building, and direct clinics, not only by grassroots community groups, but by the city specifically. We've been supporting a variety of vaccine equity grantees. We continue to do that and work with organizations on the ground who are doing the legwork necessary to get vaccines in arms. And we need to continue to do that over the next several months to increase the access for communities, especially our Black and Brown residents, where the vaccine uptake is not as high as we want it to be. In addition, as part of that $7 million, we will have ongoing needs related to PPE and support for ongoing prevention efforts related to COVID. And so this is really specific to COVID-specific response efforts and ensuring that we're able to do what's needed to continue this crisis response part of the work. These response efforts are still needed and are critical to ensure that as the world, as I like to say, the world tries to move on from COVID, that the city can provide the critically important resources to this effort and ensure that we create this equitable response and continue it. As I mentioned, we need to focus on areas not only where COVID has made existing public health challenges worse, but we also need to focus on some of our most glaring inequities that have been even more pronounced through the last year and a half. So we're going to spend about $9.5 million is what we're hoping to be able to spend in a couple different buckets that I'd like to walk through. We will allocate resources focused on both the mental health challenges that have faced us during this crisis, and that will be even more apparent as we recover by adding resources to a mental health initiative that I've talked to you a little bit about before with the council. And this is really focused on the expansion of resources and tackling stigma-related efforts to ensure that we not only have clinicians accessible in terms of our students in our public schools, ensuring that we have clinicians accessible into diverse communities, but that we are trying to break down the barrier of people raising their hand, expressing support needed and help needed related to mental health. So we're going to expand a mental health initiative in partnership with Boston Public Health Commission and Health and Human Services to be able to ensure that resources exist on the ground, especially over the next 3 to 6 months as we try to come out of what has been a difficult time. We're going to also allocate specific funds in this bucket related to the crisis that the substance use disorder has made worse, especially the residents in the Mass and Cass area. These funds are going to specifically be used to expand our medical street unit on the ground and our outreach team for the summer months, as we've seen an increase in need and severity of that need for people in crisis in the area. This is also going to include dedicated funds to increase access to HIV testing and connection to care, given the increase in HIV infections that we've seen in the area during COVID. We've seen it grow. We've seen a cluster of HIV infections that originally we'd seen in the North Shore, seen some of that in Boston pre-COVID, and then during COVID, we've seen it grow. And so we need to increase access on the ground and ensure that we can respond to this crisis in the moment. In addition, we're going to increase capacity support to some housing assessment work that we're doing on the street with additional funding for community groups. It's important that we continue both some of these short-term efforts related to figuring out if someone is ready for some of the resources that are there and ensuring that that outreach capacity can grow both through the medical street team, through our outreach team, and then of course through folks conducting these direct assessments. In addition, we're looking to use the funding to support increased access to services in the evening and overnight hours, which is a critical gap that we continue to be focused on. It's important that when we think about substance use disorder, we're not just thinking about these issues during the day that everyone sees, but obviously there's a gap in services into the evening and the night. And so we're focused on trying to expand some of those resources, not only to make sure people get their needs met overnight, but that there are resources outside of this neighborhood to support folks. As the administration, we're going to continue to work to strengthen the medium-term and long-term planning and strategy that we're doing on a regular basis to refresh the strategy that's being implemented in this area. But we're going to use these dollars to tackle some immediate next steps with this federal funding. We know that there are many basic needs and services that are driving inequities and the social determinants of health, and that we've seen throughout COVID. BPHC and HHS has worked to ensure that we not lose sight of those needs along these areas as well. So we're going to increase some additional resources that are going to focus efforts around the social determinants of health. These non-COVID specific efforts are critically important to not lose sight of. So we're going to dedicate funding resources for community-based organizations, specifically serving the hardest hit zip codes and neighborhoods with a grant program to advance their efforts focused on the social determinants of health. In addition to those specific grants to nonprofit organizations doing this work, we will dedicate specific funding to address the food insecurity gap that has been made worse through this pandemic, and in some ways worse here than in many cities across the country. With a dedicated pool of resources, we will launch a campaign to break down stigma about accessing food resources and services, a specific effort to create spaces to grow food in our urban neighborhoods, specifically for communities of color, and an equity and food access grant program to better fund community organizations doing this work on the ground that are creating real access to strategies to combat food insecurity. These non-COVID specific health inequities have been exacerbated during COVID, and we need to dedicate resources now to be able to support them so that they can make more progress on the work that they've seen only grow during this time. Finally, we will invest resources to strengthen our violence prevention, intervention, response, and recovery framework. As our counselors all know, we saw an increase in fatalities in 2020 and a decrease in the access to these resources for young adults engaged in activity in the community. So we're going to dedicate specific resources for services for older young adults and hard to serve impact players. These funds are needed to support these resources and invest in preventing an increase in crime in the community. We've already started to do some of that work this year and have seen some of it pay off, getting more young people connected into programs and services. But we need to invest in targeted programming that will help us address the need for violence intervention services in the community to prevent some of the uptick we saw in 2020 from happening again in 2021. So in those areas, that's the specific 3 to 6 month areas that we're going to be focused on the public health side, and we're eager to be able to support that work moving forward to continue to respond and recover from this pandemic. With that, I think I'm passing it to Chief Morikawa, maybe, but I'll pass it back either way. Thanks.
I think it was going to be Chief Barros Miller next. Sorry.
Thanks so much. So as I mentioned earlier, equity across our approach will inform our approach across neighborhoods, people, issues, and sectors. But I also want to take a moment to highlight the equity initiatives that fall directly under the departments in the equity cabinet. We are proposing a $1 million investment in basic needs assistance for families not eligible for previous COVID-19 benefits. This investment would build on the work led by our incredible nonprofit partners and MOYA director, Yusufi Valley, who have trusted relationships with immigrant families and were funded by the Boston Resiliency Fund. According to estimates from the BPDA, Boston has approximately 33,285 residents who are not eligible for any of the federal programs, such as unemployment benefits or other previous federal benefits over the course of the pandemic. This basic needs assistance support is one part of the overall strategy the city has been and must continue to deploy to support our most vulnerable immigrant families in particular. Other tactics in this wraparound strategy that are being funded through other sources are the Office of Food Access, Immigrant Food Network, and housing support through the Rental Relief Fund and the BHA's New City Voucher Program, and also the support that we've invested to our most vulnerable youth through the Dreamers Fellowship Program, so they can also have summer enrichment opportunities. We're also requesting a $1 million investment to support childcare and early learning initiatives. While there are childcare stabilization funds coming directly to providers from the federal government, we know that's not enough. This investment would help us reopen a sector that has been badly hurt. It would help centers that had to lay staff off, bring them back. And this is so vital to working families in Boston and to the businesses that provide childcare to those families. We'll be supporting family childcare providers in reaching full enrollment through improved marketing and recruitment, building on the Child Care Entrepreneur Fund, and expanding their capacity as the economy reopens. We've also requested $500,000 for language access and communications. We want to make sure that in all of our engagement and all of the disbursement of these funds, that we are accessible to all Bostonians, regardless of the language they speak or any communications challenges that they would have. And so this additional funding will increase the visibility of the federally funded grant opportunities and ensure accessibility that speak languages other than English or have at least one disability. Each program that we're talking about today is important, but if they're not informed and they're not reaching all Bostonians, if they're not informed by or reaching all Bostonians who are eligible, they will not be a success. And I'll be turning it over to Chief Morikawa now of Economic Development.
And just before Chief Morikawa goes, I just want to remind counselors, I drew folks' attention to this before the hearing, that you do have a memorandum from the administration. I think most folks have already perused, but the categories that are being described by the chiefs are also broken down in that memorandum. So if people want to have that in front of them, if you don't already, you may want to pull that up. Thanks. And while I've broken in, I should also say that we were joined by Councillor Ed Flynn of District 2 and Councillor Lydia Edwards of District 1. Thank you. Sorry, Chief Morikawa, you have the floor.
Great. Thank you, Chairwoman Bach. Good afternoon. Again, my name is Midori Morikawa. I'm the Chief of Economic Development for the City of Boston. I would like to speak briefly today about the strategic investments we are planning for immediate economic relief, including our small businesses and our creative economy sectors with this first round of American Rescue Plan emergency funding. So first, we are proposing to allocate $7.5 million to fully fund all eligible applicants for our commercial rent relief fund. This fund was launched back in November of 2020 and was really designed to stabilize small businesses and prevent commercial displacements across the city due to the pandemic. To date, we have issued more than $3.7 million, helping over 350 businesses remain in their current locations. With this additional funding of $7.5 million, we can immediately make meaningful grants to over 700 eligible businesses and landlords who had applied to the fund, but we were unable to support them due to lack of funding back in November. In addition, our second proposed allocation is our $8 million to reopen the Small Business Relief Fund. So this has been our most flexible source of grant funding to date. It's just to directly support our small businesses who have suffered economic loss due to the pandemic. And it can be used by small businesses to cover any of their business expenses relating to their reopening, recovery, and growth. To date, we have allocated over $6.7 million to more than 1,800 small businesses across the city. For this next round of funding, as Chief Barris Milner has mentioned earlier, we will be looking at the hardest hit industries that were hit by the pandemic, as well as working with the BPDA research team to ensure that the equity lens it continues to make an impact for our small businesses. In addition, the pandemic, as many of you know, highlighted how necessary the digital literacy and tools are to ensure economic competitiveness. And really, the pandemic really exposed a stark digital divide in our city. So to that end, we are proposing $2.4 million to be used for a number of initiatives aimed at expanding digital equity and access, mainly led by the Office of Workforce Development, but also by our Innovation Technology Department, as well as the Boston Housing Authority departments. With this funding, we will support digital literacy training into our job training programs and work to expand free public Wi-Fi in public housing. Councilors, as you know, the two industries that were particularly hard hit during the past year are tourism and our arts and culture sector. Both of these industries are major contributors to our region's economy and to our economic competitiveness. And both so our venues shuttered, our revenues decline, lack of audience, and many just out of work. So to bring these sectors back, we are making a number of investments. First, we are requesting to allocate $1 million to expand the all-inclusive Boston campaign. I hope many of you have seen the campaign throughout the city of Boston, in our bus stops, in the stations, in the radio ads. And it's really focused on accelerating the equitable recovery of our Boston's tourism, travel, and hospitality sectors, especially given the fact that they have been hit the hardest and they employ some of our Black and Brown immigrant residents of the city of Boston. So with this additional investment, we will be able to focus on increased advertising, additional creative development, and community outreach. Finally, the Mayor's Office of Arts and Culture is seeking to administer $4 million worth of grant funding to support the safe reopening of Boston's creative economy, one of the last sectors to reopen. $3 million of this funding will be modeled after the city's Reopen Boston Fund, which we started in their small business shop, and will specifically target performance venues and other businesses in the creative industries who need support in reopening safely. So that's $3 million. The remaining $1 million will support a few things. One is Arts Relief Fund. We will proposing to give out a number of grants to individual artists and creative workers, including for income qualified grants to artists. We are also proposing to provide capacity building programs for BIPOC creative workers, in addition to an allocation to the Boston Cultural Council's Opportunity Fund, which will support artist-driven projects in our neighborhoods. Thank you, and I'm happy to answer any questions at the end of the presentation, and I think I'm turning it over to Chief Dillon.
I think that's right. So good afternoon. Thank you, Councilor Bach and Councilor Flaherty and all the city councilors present today to hear this spending plan. For the record, my name is Sheila Dillon and I'm Chief of Housing for the City of Boston. I just want to go very high level for a minute. The spending plan outlined would make available $8.1 million for housing programs that will both promote housing stability and ensure an equitable recovery. I just want to give you a high level breakdown. $4.6 million would be made available for key acquisitions of occupied rental properties, which would then be converted into deed restricted affordable developments. It also leaves the door open for land acquisitions that could support future affordable development. $400,000 would be used for housing and trauma work targeted to families impacted by violence in the city, as well as housing search services and support services for families that have obtained a BHA voucher but need help with both locating the right unit for their families and getting set up and getting support services. And Joel Wool is here if there's additional questions about that. Focusing a bit on home ownership, because we know home ownership is such an important component of equity in our city and housing stability. This plan makes $3.1 million available to provide existing homeowners mortgage relief if needed, if they're behind on their mortgage payments and they can't work out arrangements with their mortgage companies and banks. And it would also support new home buyers, especially moderate income households and households of color. Now, this $8.1 million is in addition to the $50 million that the mayor announced maybe a month ago or so, but that will be used for rental relief and really supporting our renters to make sure that they can stay in their homes and make their rental payments. So the 50 million plus this 8.1, they're all very key programs, key investments in making sure that our recovery is based on inequity, but also stability, where it's all about right now for so many hundreds and hundreds of families in Boston. It's about maintaining their housing or finding new housing that they can afford and that's going to really serve their households. So I'll stop there, but certainly available to answer any questions. Am I handing this back to
I'll just
Councillor Bach and
quickly.
Councillor Flair?
I'll just quickly stay right there. And again, a heartfelt thank you to the chiefs on and their teams who have obviously been working to stand up these programs, but have been working really effectively over the last couple months to think creatively about how to get this money out using programs and streams that we already know how to do and that we can move quickly on. So we are happy, anyone from this side is happy to answer any questions, and we appreciate the council's feedback so far. We look forward to, soliciting additional feedback as we move towards, passage and eventual thinking about the other funding, and I really appreciate the collaboration and looking forward to the discussion. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much, Chief Sterrett and all of the chiefs. I will, as is my custom, hold my questions here to the end. So I will go first to Councillor Flaherty. I know that some of his questions initially were answered in the presentation, but I want to go to him again as the chair of our COVID Recovery Committee. And then for councillors, I've sent you the order. Councillor Flaherty, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I'm going to do the same to you. I'm going to defer to our colleagues, give them an opportunity to ask questions, given that I had posed a few questions in the opening. But I will just say, obviously, to Justin or whoever, I just want to make sure that anything that the acting administration is doing, I want to make sure that it's in partnership with the council. So I want to make sure that I'm included in as the chair of the COVID Relief Committee on behalf of the body, whether it's in scheduling and or announcements or disbursements of funds that pertain to the fund. So I don't know if that's Justin or whoever, but someone needs to have me on short dial, because if they don't have me on short dial and if there's spending without council approval or assent, then that's going to be a problem. So I just want to set the tone right from the outset.
Great. Thank you, Councillor Flaherty. Next up, we'll go to Councillor.
Is that
Campbell.
Justin? I just want to, I need it. I just.
Oh, sure. Sorry.
Madam Chair, I just need an answer in terms of who. So yeah, who from the acting administration side is going to be coordinating, and I just want to make sure that I'm in that dialogue, I'm in that loop on behalf of the council, so that we're on the same page as we start to sort of roll out, the funding effort here.
Yeah, absolutely. Everything that we do is going to come through the council for approval. So that side is absolutely going to require your obviously input and oversight. From the announcement point of view, we will absolutely circle with you. I will work with the IGR team and others to make sure that we're keeping both you and the council abreast of any announcements in the coming months and weeks.
10-4. And again, I appreciate that. I want to get the call in the first inning, not the ninth inning. It's the old expression, how do you like your eggs? You know what I mean? So I just want to make sure that I get that phone call so that the council is playing a role in the first inning, not later in the game.
Understood.
Great. Thank you, Councillor Flaherty. Councillor Campbell? Councillor Campbell? She was here a second ago. We may have a connectivity issue, so I'm just gonna jump to Councillor Braden while I figure out how to get Councillor Campbell back here. So Councillor Braden.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to the team for the presentation and for the summary sheet that was sent over. It's very helpful. One question I had for Chief Martinez is in terms of the vaccine outreach, it's still a concern of mine, and I think that you know about it, like you recognize it. But in our district here in Ulster Brighton, District 9, I just don't know. Do we have good numbers on the numbers of vaccinated individuals in our public housing? And it's a community is difficult to track, so I just don't know if we have got if we know what we're going after in terms of targeting outreach at specific groups in the neighbourhoods. And then also there was a question about the family childcare providers. I know because I have a neighbour who is involved with that industry and family childcare providers, and she keeps me up to date on the numbers of folks who have decided to leave the field and not continue to be childcare providers, especially during the height of COVID. I'd love to know how many childcare providers we actually lost and how we can actually, if we can bring them back, or how we would, cultivate new family childcare providers, as it's a wonderful entrepreneurial opportunity for immigrant women, especially. Let's see. Those are really the two big concerns. Oh, yes. In terms of, there's one here on housing navigation assistance and stabilization services. I've been hearing about the bureaucratic nightmare that processing vouchers is, both from advocates who are trying to help people, but also on the landlord side. So is there any way we can help use some of this money to really see if we can streamline the systems and the bureaucratic systems to be more efficient, so that the turnaround times are less and they actually end up placing more people more quickly? I heard a report today of it taking up to 2 months to get someone placed, and landlord in the private market's not going to wait 2 months for some of the vouchers. So it's sort of a cart before the horse sort of question, but it seems like if we have some extra resources in the system, that's somewhere we could target some, not a whole lot of money, but I think we could target resources to try and streamline that system and make it more efficient. Yeah, that's all for now. Thank you.
Who on the administration would like to take that?
Couldn't get off mute. Sorry about that. Yeah, Councilor Braden, thanks for raising that. Generally, what I'll say is that, and this is definitely kudos to the Boston Housing Authority team in partnership with Chief Dillon and her team, but the BHA has, done a really amazing job of making sure that vaccination clinics are happening at BHA facilities. They did it initially with buildings for seniors and folks with disabilities, then into the family clinics, and worked really diligently to not only do outreach, but then to try to bring folks in, do door-to-door efforts, and that work continues, right? So because of confidentiality, we're not able to say, this is how, we don't know, to be honest with you, this is how many folks in this building were vaccinated or not. What I can say in Austin-Brighton specifically, it is the second highest vaccinated neighborhood in the city currently, in 02134 and 02135, well above the city average. So we are seeing folks vaccinated at a really high rate. It doesn't mean that folks living in our low-income housing developments, there's still a target that we're trying to get in for vaccination. And that's why so much of the vaccine equity work is really focused on grassroots, community-based organizations being able to go into neighborhoods and do that legwork. So we're going to keep doing that. These funds are going to allow us to continue some of that work, and that includes the outreach within our housing development.
Very good. And thank you. And I appreciate all your great work. And if there's anything else we can do to help on our end, I know we have a network of community organizations that helped drive our vaccination efforts. So keep us in touch if there's anything more we can do to help.
Will do. Thanks, Councillor.
Thank you.
And just on the question around childcare, just wanted to add, based on research from the Boston Opportunity Agenda, citywide, there's been a decrease in we've lost 16.1% of childcare seats since the pandemic began.
And are those center-based ones, or are they family-based, or we don't know? We haven't got a breakdown on of where those seats disappeared from.
I can get back to you. I can send you the full report and dig into whether that includes only center-based or also some of the home daycares as well.
Very good. Thank you.
And just very quickly, Councillor, on the processing issue, we have worked really hard in the pandemic with all of the rental relief funds to make it incredibly easy for folks to access resources and, come in, give us as the bare minimum and get out. Certainly the BHA is more complicated and they're tied to a lot of HUD federal rules. But I think it might be good to have a separate meeting on your idea of using a small amount of money to really look at if we can streamline some of the requirements. So I'd be glad to set that up with Kate Bennett, the director, and yourself.
Very good. Thank you. Thank you for all your work, Sheila.
Councilor Braden, are you satisfied?
I'm satisfied. Thank you, Councillor Bob.
Great, thank you so much. We did get Councillor Campbell back after the internet difficulty, so I'm going now to Councillor Campbell. Councillor Campbell, you have the floor.
Thank you, Councillor Bach, and thank you to the administration for the presentations. And thank you to Michelle Goldberg for forwarding the email with some more details as well with respect to some of the proposed expenditures. I'll jump right in. One is just appreciate the investments around childcare, small businesses, of course, the work with respect to housing stability. So appreciate many of the investments. One question is, just recently in a meeting with the Convention Bureau talking about tourism, talking about the importance of branding and marketing. So curious if the administration has engaged with Martha Sheridan and her crew. That's my first question, because I know they want a seat at the table. The second is with respect to the housing umbrella, really great to see the investment, Chief Dillon, around acquisition and trying to do something productive with those properties before they are lost. And so curious, any thought with respect to once acquired, what will happen with them? Obviously, a lot of conversation right now around community land trusts, putting things in the hands of residents. So curious if you could elaborate a little bit more there. And then one other question, or two other questions is, mass and cast, there's some investments here in terms of mass and cast. What does that look like in practicality on solving for the crisis that we're seeing there? And then the last question is around those in our immigrant community who are eligible for various funds because they're not on the federal side. How are we going, how are we looking to protect the data and various information they provide to the city and trying to gain access to these opportunities and relief that they so desperately need as well? And then my last point is on the digital divide conversation. I know we recently had a budget hearing. Tech goes home and some other organizations also, and this is more of a comment, want to be at the table with respect to conversations around closing the digital divide and investments that the city will put forward in terms of federal dollars to close that. So just lifting that up given their continued advocacy on these issues. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Councillor Campbell. I can talk about the tourism part of it. So the All-Inclusive campaign, All-Inclusive Boston campaign, which was launched back in April, was a collaboration between the City of Boston, Collect Communication, which is our oldest minority women-owned business in Boston, Proverb Marketing, and then Greater Boston Convention and Visitor Bureau. So Martha Sheridan was one of the lead kind of creative behind the All-Inclusive Boston campaign. So with this, the federal funding, we are proposing to allocate $1 million additional funding to the All-Inclusive Boston campaign. And some of the things that we've talked about with her, Martha, is making sure that the small businesses can really access some of the members. That's part of the Visitors Bureau. I think her membership is about close to 2,000 people, right? Hotels, restaurants, and those folks. If you can really, make sure the small businesses know if there are any opportunities that comes up in those hotel hospitality industry, they should really be talking to each other. So that's one. The other thing is, we've also started working on doing some focus group with our small business owners in partnership with Martha Sheridan's office to see, hey, how can we make the membership of the Visitors Bureau more accessible, right, to our small businesses in our neighborhoods, so they can kind of build their capacity and kind of have access to some of the industry. And then the last thing is, the visitor centers at in the Boston Common. Apparently, they have about 1.6 million visitors every year that come through that center. So we've talked about highlighting some of our work, our small businesses, making sure that the visitors that come to Boston can actually go out, right, not just downtown, but to our neighborhoods, the restaurants, and all the diverse array of services and businesses that our neighborhoods offer that they can take advantage of. So those are some of the sort of early conversation that we're having now, and happy to kind of keep you updated on where things go with that.
I'll just respond to some of the housing questions. So, Councillor Campbell, thank you for your ongoing support of the AOP program, where we're really trying to acquire our occupied properties. We've had some major successes in your neighborhood. We are right now working with the Chinatown Land Trust and the Citywide Land Trust on acquisitions. And I think the only thing that's back from doing even more is resources. Even though it's a cost-effective program, it is funded by the city alone. So that every unit we buy, comes with a price tag. And so we just received $4 or $5 million from the CPA round, which was wonderful. And thank you for that. And this will keep the program going. So we do want to continue working with our land trust. They are some of the few organizations in the city that are very interested in buying smaller occupied properties. So we want to make sure that we have the resources when they come knocking and they've got a good project for us to fund. And I do think that as we dispose of our land, and we're down to not that many properties that have a lot of development opportunity, it is going to be important for the city to have resources available so that folks can land bank and buy land so that we can continue to develop affordable housing throughout the city.
Hi. So thanks, Councilor Campbell, for that question. The investments from this emergency funding, which is really over the next 6 months, specific to Mass and Cass, are really to try to answer two main pieces that we think are immediate needs that we're focused on, which is to increase the capacity of the outreach effort that's happening on the ground, right? So we're going to use a piece of these resources to expand the medical street effort that's happening in partnership with Boston Healthcare for the Homeless. There's a need to have more folks engaging from the medical street team with individuals. We see more individuals, and the severity of the experiences individuals have require more support from medical engagement. So we both want to expand that team, as well as the street outreach team that is engaging with folks. Lots of folks want to get folks into treatment and get folks, into supportive services, but that requires engagement, right? It's something you can't pick someone up and put them in a treatment program. You have to build relationship with folks on the ground. So we both want to expand that street outreach team, expand the medical street team on the ground through some specific efforts. And then we're also, one of the major issues is that in the morning in the neighborhood, things are sort of very heightened. People are either coming out of shelter, they've overnight had no services or programs accessible to them. So one of the things we're trying to do is also to expand the ability to make sure people have services in the evening and at night, and that's about engagement. So not only getting people from services and resources through engagement, but also getting them to other areas where they may get their needs met outside of the neighborhood. So these funds are really about short-term emergency response situations in the area. They will be complemented, obviously, by the medium-term and long-term strategy conversations we've been having, real specifically related to decentralization of services, related to improved coordination through the police department and our street outreach team, as well as ongoing access to housing, low-threshold housing supports across the city. So this is meant to be the short-term issues that we're trying to address with this emergency funding.
And then I believe there's a question about protecting privacy data. And so that's why for us, it's so important, especially as it relates to the immigrant community, that we're working with trusted nonprofit partners like the Boston Chinatown Neighborhood Center, Caribbean Youth Club, et cetera, so that we don't need to collect and hold any data that could hurt our immigrant communities. We're hyper aware of that. And so we won't be collecting individual level data, but we'll just be working through trusted nonprofit partners to get the funds out to the folks that need it.
Thank you all for the responses. And I'll just say I'm really happy that the council does have this committee to have a more direct say in how some of these funds are going to be designated for use. And I can't stress enough, and I know there's a task force and there's some engagement going on, just how critically important it is to engage community members and residents, of course, in a public way, including, obviously, I appreciate all the updates here and everyone's obviously in contact with some stakeholders, but what does it mean to have also at some point a more thorough engagement process with just the average citizen who may not even be connected, of course, to an organization. So I'm really excited for the new council committee and working in partnership. Thank you, and thank you, Councilor Bach and Councilor Flaherty.
Thank you, Councilor Campbell. Next up is Councilor Mejia.
Hi. Yes. Give me a minute. I gotta fix this.
Councilor Mejia, it sounds like maybe it's on,
Yeah.
on multiple devices.
Is that better?
No, we're still getting the echo. Are you sure you're not on two devices on the hearing?
Okay, I just turned off my phone.
Yeah.
Is that better?
Yep, that's better.
Okay, great. Thank you so much for the thorough presentation. We're really happy to see the administration here and all the chiefs crunching those numbers. It's really important. So thank you for all of that. I guess so some of my questions really rely on just more along the lines of the outreach and engagement, the community engagement process. I'm just really curious. Oftentimes it's the usual suspects, the same organizations that we collaborate with when we're looking to support our most vulnerable communities. So I'm just curious if anyone could speak to kind of like what deep engagement are we proposing to do to ensure that organizations that usually aren't part of the network, but are definitely reaching our hardest hit communities, have a voice and are able to participate in the distribution process. And I have other questions, but we can start with that one for now. Did we freeze? Did I freeze? Oh my God. Councilor Bach.
No, we can hear you. We can hear you. I think we just have to figure out which of the many chiefs are going to answer that question.
This is overall communication and community engagement. So I think this falls in within all different aspects, and maybe Chief Miller might be able to have some insight, because if we're talking about doing this through an equity lens, I'm just curious about what that looks like when we're thinking about engaging nonprofit organizations that are not maybe part of your portfolio, but are definitely out in these streets doing the work, but just have never been invited to sit at the table or eat. So I'm just curious if you could just talk a little bit about what efforts are being made to ensuring that when we're thinking about equity, we're also thinking about some of these smaller nonprofit organizations so that they can get a little bit of love too.
Yeah, I can speak a little bit about the outline of the plan, but as you mentioned, this is really Chief Miller's work, so I can just give a high-level outline of the engagement plan, but also want to invite all of you for your input in shaping and supporting, the outreach for the plan, to make sure that that everyone knows they have an opportunity to weigh in. So there's going to be a layered approach, including community meetings starting in late June. There will be a digital engagement process where there will be a webpage and feedback forms for people to submit their ideas, their testimonies, and there will be an approach that's sort of community-based, but also issue-based. So there will be, department heads as issue experts sort of convening groups around specific issues, but also just broader, come hear about this and come give us your input. So there's sort of a layered approach that we hope will help reach everyone. Definitely looking for ideas on how to ensure that that we are accessible. Some of the forums we've talked about will be virtual, and so we want to make sure that accessibility is not a challenge for folks joining in. As you know, we always in our outreach and in our facilitation employ a multilingual approach so that people can engage at whatever their preferred language is. But definitely look for your input on how to make sure that we're reaching those that have been the most impacted, which is the whole point.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. And I'm going to talk to Chief Dillon just really quick. You know, there are a lot of nonprofit organizations that support our most vulnerable. And I'm also curious in terms of the rental relief efforts, if you were to call one organization, they would probably have 500 people who are already lined up and ready to go. So can you just talk to me a little bit about kind of your engagement efforts to support our most vulnerable, utilizing some of these nonprofit organizations? What does that look like for you all in terms of rental relief?
Sure. So, you know, we've been watching this very closely, making sure that we're continuing to get applications and from every part of the city, and that does seem to be the case. To date, we've helped just shy of 3,000 households and spent about $12 million. And I'll get over. I don't think we've done it in a while, Counselor, but where the applications are coming from. So we are continuing to work with nonprofit vendors in many neighborhoods and that have capacity in multiple languages. But we have also starting to identify the need that we probably need to expand it even further. We need to get some boots on the ground in Chinatown, probably some additional boots in East Boston, et cetera. So Taylor Kane is working on that now. But you know, we've been using every medium. We've been using you know, every news outlet, Twitter in multiple languages. I think it's 11 languages on our website. But I still think, you know, what we're learning is you need people in every neighborhood that individuals or families trust, right? And for rental relief, it's all about being able to go to a nonprofit or go to an organization that you trust to fill out paperwork or give information over. So I think we've done a very admirable job working with it within the infrastructure, but I think even we are recognizing that we're going to have to drill down even further, especially as the protections come to an end this month. But so why don't I'd like to get you the report of where the rental relief applications are coming from, in what neighborhoods. It also flesh out with you and other city councilors on and even broadening the reach, as like I said, because a lot of the protections are coming to an end. And while we're doing just an enormous amount of outreach, it can always be improved.
Yeah, no, thank you. And I appreciate that. Yes. And if I'm not sure if you have this information available, but it would also be great to know which organizations have you've been partnering with. So when you send me that info, then I could potentially identify a few organizations that I know have reached out to us for to get plugged into this support. So I'll make sure we make that connection happen.
That would be great.
Yeah. And then I guess and then the other thing that I would offer is, like, I always talk about hair salons and barbershops, but let me just tell you that that's where it's at. Because if you're getting your hair done, you trust somebody to blow your hair out. In these spaces, people kind of usually connect and share some of the struggles that they may be facing. So I would recommend that perhaps you also reach out to some of the smaller businesses and just put some literature out in these spaces, or some of the local bodegas, just places where people frequent, even some of the laundromats, as places where you just want to disseminate as much information as possible. I would target some of those spaces. And then my last question, because I don't want to hold anybody hostage and I don't want to see that gavel, is that I know you mentioned the business relief was going towards exclusivity, I believe, to the hospitality industry. And I'm just curious, will there be other industries that we're going to be supporting? Again, I'm going to mention some of these high touch industries like barbershops and hair salons. They really have suffered during this transition. And I'm just curious if there's going to be a rollout to supporting other business outside of the hospitality and arts and culture space.
Yep. So thank you, Councilor Mahia. And, sorry for the confusion. So the Small Business Relief Fund, we will be very targeted in providing those grants to industries that were hit hard by the pandemic. So just the ones that you mentioned, right? The hair salon, the barber, the personal care, right? Sort of industry, the restaurants, certainly retail, food businesses. I think those are the ones that, come to our minds, and our data also supports, right? Those are hard hit industries. So certainly we that's kind of our intent, is to get this relief fund out and see where the needs are, in keeping in mind these the data on the hard hit industry. The tourism is specifically the campaign, the All Inclusive Boston campaign that we launched back in April. So that's the $1 million sort of allocation proposal that we have putting forth to make sure that some of these small businesses in our neighborhoods can thrive and can come back to the pre-COVID level. And we want to make sure we highlight them, right? And we want to feature them, and we want to make sure that tourists, visitors, residents are using all of the resources that our neighborhoods businesses provide in the city of Boston.
And is there a range in terms of the allocated amount of what small businesses can expect? And when you get those infographics out, please send them our way so that we can help distribute. But can you just give us a range of what folks can expect?
Yeah, so so this Small Business Relief Fund has been our most flexible funding source. So on average, we've given out, I think, 3,600 per business. So some are less, right, than 36, some are more than 3,600, and it's really, really flexible. So that's why people have used it to pay their payroll, for their inventories, for their food, for equipment, for PPE, for earlier in the pandemic. We've expanded a lot on the outdoor dining. So a lot of those equipment purchases for outdoor dining, and then the rent, again, is another big one that we've also assisted as well. So it really varies in terms of ranges, but 3,600 is an average that we've seen over the past year.
Thank you all for all your hard work, and I do see that gavel, so I don't have any further questions. Thank you so much.
Great. Thank you so much, Councilor Mejia. Next up is, sorry, I have my list in front of me here. President O'Malley.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and good afternoon, colleagues. Great to see everybody. I think I'd asked this before, Justin, and this is more for satisfying my own curiosity as one of the remaining 13 county commissioners. But does the Chelsea, Winthrop, and Revere money come through us as well?
Ultimately, it will, Councillor. It's the same type of money that we're getting, but it's getting funneled through the state first, who's then responsible for doling it out to us. But we are waiting. We have made contact with State A&F. We have submitted the paperwork. We're just waiting until they finalize their approach to getting that funding to the city, which we will then ultimately come to the council for an accept and expend for.
And then will we have in the city? I just think there's no precedence for anything like this. I worked for Suffolk County Sheriff Andrea Cabral. I remember having to come to testify before the council. But will we invite your counterparts and these two smaller cities in town to come and sort of explain the same way? How does it work?
No, we'll just get the city of Boston's portion, and the other pieces will go directly to the other cities themselves.
So the council does not vote on the expenditures for the non-Boston Suffolk County municipalities.
Exactly. Yeah, we'll just get them. We'll get a check ultimately in the mail from the state, and then we'll come to the council to vote on what to spend it on.
So perhaps there was some state change between 2006 and now that indicates the fall of, I mean, this was your world for many years, it's the fall of county government. Okay. I just want to go through line by line, just not line by line, but sort of topics. The $7 million on low vaccine rates, will that include, Chief Martinez, boosters? And when when do you anticipate that the sort of boosters will be needed, as we're, a couple months away from a year that some people were able to get vaccinated?
Yeah, I mean, I think, thanks, Councilor O'Malley. The point of being able to use these resources around vaccine and testing is obviously going into the next 6 months, we need to have the capacity to still vaccinate folks.
Yeah.
So that may be first vaccine, it may be booster vaccine later in the fall. I think, most infectious disease experts think that you'll likely need a shot once a year, possibly. Yeah. And that wouldn't be until pretty late in the fall, early winter for most people. So this may be part of that money. I'm going to think it's going to be part of a next chapter of money that we'll obviously need to build the infrastructure across the city for that.
And I would assume I would hope that our approach for boosters will be similar to sort of the tremendous job you and your team have done working with some of our nonprofit and healthcare institutions to just have such a wide and deep range and just a real,
That's our
anticipate.
goal. Yeah.
Thank you for that, Chief. When we jumping around a little bit, the digital equity piece, I think it was 2.4 million. Will we be able to use some of this fund for upgrading technological, our bandwidth at City Hall to allow us to continue to operate in these type of settings when we're going to see an increased number of individuals back at work to be able to handle? I mean, I'm lucky that I've got a good connection. As my colleagues know, I often lose signal in my office. But can anyone sort of speak to that? I know that's less about digital equity, but I think that's a reasonable expenditure of some of this funds.
Sure, I'll take that, Councilor. So that would fall into the sort of second bucket of money that we're not talking about today, but would sort of be with the longer term improvements to city broadband and sort of widespread broadband services.
Okay, and then similarly, some of the money on childcare, would we be able to apply some of that to some of the city employees who are having some difficulty finding childcare?
So they certainly wouldn't be excluded from if they were, a low-income employee. It depends on the type of service. Most of this is going directly to providers to, as Chief R.S. Miller said, to improve their, get them back up and running as they're sort of rebuilding capacity. This is not sort of a dedicated funding for city employees, but I think we were sort of certainly if they're a City of Boston employee, they're eligible.
Okay, based on needs. And I had a question for Sheila. She may have dropped out, but we'll. Oh, there you are.
No,
Sorry.
I'm here. I have bad connection at Hawkins Street, so.
Oh, so well then I'll make it quick. The sort of the rental relief increase and appreciate the acting mayor's bold announcement of the 50 million. I'm curious where we are with requests. When we may have lost you again. I think you're having some technical difficulties, so we can.
Can you hear me?
The voice is coming through, Sheila. You got it. Yep.
Yeah. Okay. So we're just shy of 13,000 households supported. Sorry, 3,000 households supported with a little over 12 million. We're receiving about 300 applications per week, but I anticipate that at the end of this month, after all of the rental protections come to an end, that we're going to see an uptick in the application. So we still have plenty of money to get us through this duration. And the state also continues to fund Boston families, and they too have a lot of federal funds left. So I'm feeling pretty good about the resources we have to deal with the issue.
Okay, no, that's helpful. Thank you for that perspective. And then my next question was on business, and I know Midori. I'm sorry, I swear I'm not purposefully calling on you guys when your screen goes dark. But the biggest amount allocated seems to be the $8 million in small business. I'm just curious what our outreach has sort of been to some of these businesses, how we're working with Main Street. What are the restrictions on some of these potential, I don't know what the right word is. You don't want to say gifts, but support grants, et cetera. So can you just talk very briefly about sort of the small business support as we open back up?
Yeah, certainly. So you're absolutely right. So $8 million to the commercial, the Small Business Relief Fund, and then the $7.5 million to the Commercial Rent Relief Fund. So these are fund grants that we've stood up, during pandemic and have been high demand, right? Especially the Commercial Rent Relief Fund. We just were not able to meet the demand, early on. So we're requesting and proposing to just allocate additional dollars for that. We've been working very closely with the business owners as well as landlords. Regard to that specific grant program, we want to make sure that we have buy-in and also, information from landlords as well to ensure that the business owners are in need of the rent relief. In terms of the commercial, the Small Business Relief Fund, again, this is our most flexible funding source. We have been having a lot of information out during our Small Business Weekly call every Tuesday at 3:00 as we're speaking. There is one going on right now. We usually attract anywhere from 100 to 200 small businesses. They tune in to find out new grant funding opportunities and resources. We also send out information to our small business listserv. We have about 16,000 small businesses registered. On that, we provide these outreach effort, whether to weekly call, and we also have weekly small business office hours in multiple languages. Our staff are capable of and can staff in different languages for that. So those are some of the outreach strategies that we've deployed to make sure that we reach as many people as possible.
Good, and count on us as partners as well, particularly the district councilors. We've got some great relationships with our local. Did you say there are 600,000 businesses that are on your?
So 16,000.
16,000. I was going to say, my Lord, that is remarkable. Great. Well, 16,000 is a remarkable number as well.
Yes, thank you.
So, well done. That's all for this round. Thank you all. I really appreciate it. And it's obviously, one of the reasons why I created the committee is so that we can have opportunities like this, and obviously working in concert with the Ways and Means Chair. But this is great. And I know we're all on the same page, and this is really going to be transformative to so many individuals, particularly as it relates to equity, small business development, housing, food access, et cetera, et cetera. So thank you all. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, President O'Malley. Councillor Baker?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, everybody from the administration. It's not often we get to talk about $50 million gifts, so this is a good day. Just a couple things. Justin, you talked about the first bucket and the second bucket. So second bucket, I'm assuming we're going to see some city infrastructure that we're going to be able to build up and maybe some investments that will really set us up towards the future. I look forward to that. On the childcare, is there an opportunity to maybe augment what we do? I know it's not about the city worker, but we're telling our city workers that they need to go back into city home. We've had multiple, I've had multiple people calling to say, I don't have anything to do with my baby that I just had during COVID or those sorts of things. So are we looking to expand, or can we look to expand that city hall program at all, or the availability city, the places that the city and state people use that are coming to work in our buildings? Do we have an opportunity to augment that program at all with this money here?
Sure. So a couple things. And so first and foremost, we are looking to get City Hall childcare. And we're actually very proud that, unlike some of the other centers who have had to lay off staff because people haven't been sending there, we've kept everyone employed for the City Hall childcare. So we are, the City Hall childcare center is ready to reopen fully at capacity once people start coming back. So we're very proud of that. Obviously, they're going to do it in a slow way for the benefit of the child. They can't put all the kids in at once. So really, thankful for the team down there and their efforts to get us back up and running. I think we are certainly also mindful that childcare is an issue for employees as they start to come back to work. We are talking about a very small portion of the workforce who has been working from home. So we are really talking about a small percentage of the overall city workforce. With that said, we have set up through the EAP, the Employee Assistance Program, a dedicated individual who is responsible for coordinating people to childcare options. So if you are getting calls, certainly have them call HR, and they are calling different city neighborhood childcare centers as well as downtown childcare centers to connect people to those resources. So certainly trying to make any and all available resources to folks as they transition back to normal.
Okay, thank you, Justin. And I'm just going to hit a couple of the topics with a question after it, and whoever can answer it, that would be greatly appreciated. And this one's probably for Sheila. Sheila, we talked about acquisitions. So we're going to help CDCs and nonprofits acquire properties, or is there city opportunities there? Maybe Sheila's gone.
Yeah, so
Oh.
so with the occupied buildings, we've been working with both nonprofits and for-profits if they want to buy occupied buildings and then agree to ongoing deed restrictions and affordability restrictions because, you know, because we've given them an investment. So we've worked with both, Counselor, quite successfully.
Yeah.
On setting up a fund for land acquisitions, once again, if they've got experience and interest in building affordable housing for Boston residents, we would work with anyone and everyone as long as they have the appropriate experience and have the ability to carry through.
So you would help the CDC or the nonprofit if they said, we want to get this land here and this is what our intention is, we're going to build X amount of units and they will all be deed restricted.
Absolutely. And getting in the acquisition and supporting those that want to do acquisitions is getting more and more important, especially as Boston becomes a very, developed city. There's just not a lot of opportunities. So people are going to have to make acquisitions if we're going to continue our affordable housing production.
And we are open to private people entering into these relationships, Sheila?
Absolutely.
Okay. Thank you. So as far as down on Mass and Cass, Marty, Chief Martinez, this will probably be for you, and I'm just going to kind of talk to you, answer what you think you need to answer to. So that's great that we're expanding the outreach teams, the medical and the straight outreach team going into the night. That's excellent. Now back to infrastructure, Marty, are we going to be able to buy certain infrastructure in this round here that would help us down the line? I think we're talking about mobile vaccination sites. So hopefully we're not always going to need the mobile vaccination vehicles. Will we be able to buy with this money certain infrastructure? Like I think of the needle return team that we're in discussions with the nonprofit there, where it's sort of a needle buyback. Will we be able to maybe enter into a discussion with them? Will we buy an infrastructure for them so we can expand that program, and maybe when they're returning the needles, we could have the bathrooms be accessible also? Would we be open to doing something like that?
Yeah, no, I appreciate the question, Counselor. I mean, yeah, in the short term, what we're trying to do is make sure that we can expand capacity. And we sort of seen this as two different buckets, right? The short-term piece being like, what's the immediate things that we can make happen, knowing that once the council approves this money, we can start to implement ASAP, right? Yeah. I do think some of the medium term, I don't want to say longer term because it's sort of like over the next 6 months or so, what can we do to sort of ensure that there is additional resources, to your point, and opportunities to expand those pieces. So both on the bathroom or sanitation front, we do have city money already budgeted because we're trying to work through some options to try to create access to bathrooms, if you will, and looking at some of the ideas that have been floated by the task force, but also to make sure that we can kind of do that legwork. So we already have money in the actual regular budget process for that we're exploring, as well as money to expand the syringe exchange effort. So there's already money in the current budget to do that. This is money that we don't have budgeted that would allow us to engage and reach more people to get them referred out to services in different areas. So that's what we're focused on with these dollars right here.
Yeah, so you're saying in our current city budget, we're going to see some infrastructure down there that includes access to bathrooms, whether they're mobile or someplace that we decide to put them.
Yeah, so I'm sorry.
Go ahead. No, you go ahead.
No, I was gonna say, councilors, yeah, we do have money in the budget to explore some of the ideas that were laid out while we're working through the bathroom issue in general. So yes, there's money in our proposed budget.
Yeah, good clarification. That's in the proposed FY22 budget that we also look forward to partnership on with the council.
Yeah, that we're taking a vote on. I think first vote may be tomorrow, actually. Correct?
Yes.
Yeah,
correct.
okay. now there's something happening in my district where there's overlap here with acquisition in the arts. The Humphrey Street Studios is being priced out of their studios. I think there's about 50 people in there operating, and I think maybe with a little bit of help, and it might be too late. Kara's probably familiar with this. I don't know if there would be an opportunity for us to inject ourselves there and maybe with some of this money be able to save an area that, a building that is really generates a lot of good work and in an area of town where I think can use it. So if there's an opportunity for me to have an offline conversation with somebody, maybe that's Sheila Dillon, maybe we've already exhausted all of those things there, but.
So, yeah, so
Sheila,
glad to talk to you about it. There's a community meeting tomorrow night. Yeah,
Really?
sure. I'm familiar with this. We've been working on this for years, and
Yeah.
The owner's been frustrating. It is under agreement with someone else, but I don't know if that entity is going to move forward. There's a community meeting tomorrow night that I'm going to attend, so I'd be glad to call you afterwards and we could strategize about the artist.
Where is the community? Is it a Zoom meeting, Sheila? Yeah.
It's a Zoom meeting.
Yeah, I
believe.
think
Yeah.
we'll be
I'll make
on.
sure the office knows.
Yeah, that's on our schedule,
Okay.
so we'll be there. So maybe we can circle back after that.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. City voucher program, Sheila, I know you probably talked about it. I apologize if I didn't hear it. Is there an opportunity for us to augment the city voucher program?
Well, and Justin's looking at me, so this
He's
is
saying no.
one-time money, right?
Yeah,
Yeah,
okay.
I think we are, again, super proud that we were able to support the full $5 million in the city operating budget that we look forward to the council's consideration of. But I think in this one, we wanted to sort of focus on standing up some near-term programs and thinking about some of that long-term structural stuff with the rest of the federal money.
Okay, I
Yeah,
see you getting
and
uncomfortable there, Justin. I'll leave it alone.
No, but it's also the voucher program. The voucher you have to fund every year, and this is one-time resource. So we don't want to set any family up for not being able to fund them in the future.
Okay. And back to Marty, I don't know if I finished up the point, but Marty, I would like to see us get some infrastructure here for down and Mass and Cass, whether if it's the needle exchange and wrapped into having a bathroom in the same vehicle. I think we really need to start looking at some real infrastructure down there. I would appreciate that. And so just to be clear, Kenzie, maybe to you, accept and expend this $50 million, and then it's out of our hands. It's all this money is going to be spent in these buckets here.
Yeah, so, and Councilor Baker, I addressed this a little bit up at the start, but basically so we've got this 500 million that's in this category of coming to us local aid, separate from the 400 for the schools and separate from the 50 plus for rental relief. And some of that we're going to need in year 2, year 3, right out for revenue replacements. So we've got basic services, and some of that's for these big picture moonshot things. And the challenge that we've got is that, I think the council expects, as folks have heard, right, to be really in, as Councilor Flaherty said, in the first inning on some of those big picture things. But we're sort of grappling with the fact that we do need to get some money out the door in a short term because we've got short-term crises, right? So what we asked the administration to do was originally they had said, give us the 112 or whatever, and then, allocate that to us, and then we'll have this committee of departments figure out what to do with it. And we said, no, that's not going to work because the council wants to know what we're authorizing, right? So what they've done is shrunk that pool to kind of 50 million to talk about 3 to 6 month things. And they've come up with a set of proposals. I won't count this time against you. And they've come up with a set of proposals, and that's what they're bringing to us today. So it's more detailed, frankly, than we get in a lot of our appropriation orders. Yeah. But it is true that, once we authorize this 50 million, we're authorizing it to be spent as described, right? But that is our vote on this 50 million, which is 10% of that kind of 500. So that's, and from my perspective, as Ways and Means Chair, that bigger picture, longer term conversation is more appropriately chaired by the new COVID recovery committee, right? And that's so we're kind of putting that Councilor Flaherty's space, but obviously, you know, we're all aware of some of the immediate challenges that we're facing as a city.
So this 50 million is more immediate challenges that we can address right away. We will be more involved, and so like, will it be coming in buckets of 50 million? Okay, now we're going to do the next 50 million. Do you have any sense of what that's going to be?
I imagine so.
Maybe Justin.
I mean,
maybe Justin.
Yeah, Justin, you want to speak to that?
Yeah, I honestly think it's going to depend on sort of the community engagement process, what the sort of bigger picture stuff is. I think the council alluded to, you know, we have 5 years to spend this money, or 5 fiscal years to spend this money. So we're really trying to figure out a sustainable way to spend it, a way we can make some meaningful investments in some long-term infrastructure. We're not going to know exactly what those buckets are going to be until we have that robust dialogue that we will certainly have with the council.
Yeah, like, are we going to be able to have the discussion around, okay, Parks Department needs people. Are we going to be able to hire 10 people to go? And this is, I'm just throwing, I'm not, you know, whatever the department is, it could be Parks, Public Works, Transportation. You know, there's labor needs in nearly every department. Are we going to be at the point, you know, in 6 months or next year where we're saying, yep, we're going to take Fed money and hire 10 more people on Parks Department, 10 more people in here, 4 more people there? Are we going to get to that? Are we going to be able to use this money in that way, Justin? And not the 50 million. I'm talking about the
future money. So I think in the short term, we are planning to use, and we will be back in front of the council in a week or two or a couple weeks to talk about how we're going to use this federal money in the city budget, and that is sort of direct investments in city services, like you're talking about. I think we do have to be a little mindful that, you know, sort of hiring one-off positions with this funding is going to have to be in a sustainable way, because this money will go away at some point. And the last thing we want to do is hire someone, create an expectation of a service, create a service, and then, you know, have to figure out how to pay for it in 3 years when this, or 4 years when this money goes away. So I think it's definitely on the table. It's definitely part of the conversation. The most near-term way you're going to see that is as part of the revenue replacement conversation in a couple weeks.
Yeah. Okay. And my last part, I'll be done in a second, Kenzie, is, and you've answered this probably 12 times for me. I know we can't put it towards any pension liability or OPEB. I don't think so. But can we put it towards other debt we may have that would help? You know, so one-time expenditure that will pay debt down, that will save us in the long run. Is there any talk around that at a higher level, or are we looking at any debt that we can clear up with this?
Not that I'm aware of, Counselor. We have to be, there's two things. It not only can it have to be, you know, it can't be used for pensions, it has to be COVID related, right? So sort of arbitrarily picking some debt to pay down would be a little bit, I think, in the gray zone or certainly or unavailable, but we're certainly happy to continue the discussion on it.
All right, so if we offered a buyout, COVID related buyout, could it go towards that?
I don't believe so, Counselor.
Someday you're going to get to the answer where you're saying, yeah, we can put it towards pensions. But just not today.
I'm really happy to have that conversation with the federal government, Counselor.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Chairman. And thank you, everybody else, for your time.
Great. Thank you, Councilor Baker. Councilor Flynn?
Thank you. Thank you, Councilor Bach, and thank you to Chief Martinez and Sheila Dillon. I worked closely with them over the last 15, 16 months, almost every day on these issues. So I want to say thank you to Marty and to Sheila. Let me start with, well, before I start, I just want to make sure, Justin, that the city council is part of the decision-making process at the very beginning. Flaherty wants to be there on the first inning. I want to be there during batting practice, so I don't miss the first inning. So I want to make sure Michael and this committee is fully engaged, and y'all working closely with them. So that's my number one priority, is making sure that this council is working closely with you, and I don't want to see the council get caught off guard by any spending. Is that fair enough, Justin?
Very fair, and we're already, as Councilor Bach alluded to, you know, we've already shifted our thinking to try to, you know, to make sure the council is involved at the outset, and you know, the longer term conversations will be centered with Councilor Flaherty and his new committee. So definitely will be integral and part of the batting practice per se.
Okay, that's good to know. And the reason I say that, I know as it relates to my district, I want to be engaged on everything that happens in my district. I know my district better than anybody else. So I need to weigh in. Having said that, I know Sheila and Marty know about the large developments, public housing developments in South Boston, including Mary Ellen McCormick, Old Colony, and Lynch, West Broadway, West 9th Street. Probably the most diverse area of the city, large Latinx, large Somalian community. Are we factoring them in during this process, making sure that this immigrant community that's often overlooked because they live in South Boston, where the income people think is high? But myself and Marty Martinez spent a lot of time in this summer on vaccinations, on food equity. So I want to make sure that these Latinx residents, Somalians, immigrants, many of them might not be undocumented, but we want to make sure that they get the same level of services as everybody else. Anyone want to take that one for me?
Well, I can say, Counselor, let me take my video off. I can say that using other federal funding that came to us through COVID relief, we have worked with the BHA to set up a very extensive funding mechanism so they can assist any of the residents living in public housing that have fallen behind on their rent. And that is really critical because they have the relationship. So they are door knocking, and they are reaching out to anyone that they have record of that has become behind in their rent and that may need services. So it's not this particular pot of money that we're talking about today, but a very similar pot of money that is being made available for all public housing residents.
Oh, okay. Thank you, Sheila. I just want to make sure my constituents are factored in here. A lot of people think South Boston is a wealthy community. And as you know, the public housing developments, there's high concentration of poverty there. So I want to make sure my constituents are factored in as well. So thank you, Sheila. I appreciate that.
Counselor, I just want one briefly.
Yeah.
Counselor Flynn, thank you for bringing that up. I think it's, obviously both in the housing development related to vaccine access, as you know, and we worked with you to make sure we're creating testing within the development, and we need to keep doing that. We can't skip that. I think your point's also raised, and I know you care about this as well, but obviously that's also the case sometimes with our residents in Chinatown, that there's because of the zip code they live in, sometimes that gets lost in the need there. So we want to continue to do that, and we'll continue, especially on the vaccine front, make sure that they're connected into these immediate resources. So we're going to keep doing that.
Thank you, Chief. That's excellent. Chief, wanted to follow up. I know you talked about HIV and AIDS. It's an issue I've been studying and learning in talking to a lot of people over the last 2 years, especially the South End Health Center, Fenway Health Center, BU Medical Center, the public health staff. I agree with you. We need more money for services, for care, for prevention, for treatment. What are we going to do, Chief, in terms of specifics to make sure we try to get a hold of the growing increases in HIV and AIDS throughout the city of Boston?
Yeah, thanks for that, Counselor. I mean, this is an issue that, right before COVID, we started seeing a little bit of a spike, and then it got worse during COVID. And I'll tell you two of the reasons it got worse during COVID. There was a definitely decrease in people getting tested, which means we didn't catch soon enough for some folks, and then folks may have infected others. So one, there's a decrease in access to testing. And the second is that because people may have been connected to getting their HIV care through a program or service that either closed or they didn't access during COVID, which means they may have fallen out of care. So I know when people talk about some of the issues, even at Mass and Cass, and people being places and all the concerns people have, there are people who get their HIV medication on the street daily from folks of our medical team, right? So I do think what we're trying to do with the resources that we're putting into this funding is to increase testing testing in locations that maybe are only testing once a week, for example, but to increase access to testing. And also, though, you making sure that the outreach teams that are doing their legwork can get folks back into their medication regimens who are already HIV positive, which is important. And last but not least, the uptick in HIV infections is really amongst intravenous drug users. And so we really, once again, need to make sure we're educating folks on accessing resources, doing the work that's necessary to ensure that we're spreading information about PrEP for folks who are using drugs with needles, and to really make sure that that legwork continues. We should not be seeing this uptick that we're seeing around HIV. And so we're going to continue to do that with some of this funding, but more so even further into the next fiscal year.
Thank you, Chief. Sheila, I know you mentioned, and I'm sorry, Chief Martinez also mentioned it as well. Chinatown, we're seeing a lot of development continue now throughout the downtown area. I want to make sure that the affordable housing stays in Chinatown, that we continue building more affordable housing, especially for our seniors, for our immigrant neighbors, persons with disabilities in Chinatown. We want to save the neighborhood. Myself and Chief Martinez held the first public meeting on COVID-19, I think, in the country. We had it at Josiah Quincy School. But Sheila, what can we do? I know you mentioned Chinatown Land Trust, an outstanding, excellent organization, but what can we do to make sure Chinatown remains a community of immigrants, it remains a community of families struggling, but there's an opportunity for them, not just the wealthy that have money to come to the downtown area?
So, Councillor, I'm very thankful that you keep Chinatown top of mind all every day, all day, because it's really a very, very important neighborhood that we all have to work together on constantly if we're going to maintain it. I looked the other day and I think Chinatown, the affordable rates in Chinatown are in the high 40s, which is good, and I think that has helped preserve Chinatown and also support the local businesses. But we always have a very healthy pipeline of projects, affordable housing projects in Chinatown that we always have to move forward. So that is one thing. We also have to continue to work with our Office of Economic Development. And, I was on a meeting today with folks from Chinatown, and they were saying, as you know too well, how hard hit some of the businesses have been. So making sure that we're in coordination. And I know the Office of Economic Development is doing a lot of outreach in this area, and we got to make sure that those businesses survive. Two other thoughts. The Chinatown Land Trust is bringing us projects. Lydia Lowe is bringing us projects to look at. She wants to buy existing buildings and keep them in the land trust. They've been expensive, but we had a very good meeting today, and where some of the funding that we're mentioning today would go towards acquisition. So hopefully, if prices are somewhat reasonable, we can start working with the land trust on acquisitions. And then finally, I would say, there has been a lot of great planning in Chinatown, and I think it's going to be important that the downtown plan recognize Chinatown, as a very unique community that needs to be preserved. And, the downtown plan and associated zoning needs to really take that into effect when they finalize the plan. And I'm sure they'll be doing that with your office. So, it's building, it's sustaining the businesses, and it's ongoing planning to make sure that we keep Chinatown as a real vibrant neighborhood. Thank you, Sheila. Thank you for your help and support for helping the residents of Chinatown. I really appreciate it. Councilor Bach, I don't have any further questions. Two brief comments. I know this is not about the public schools. That's at another time. Okay. My final comment is, I believe Justin mentioned it. You mentioned there might be some money for Boston water and sewer infrastructure. The South End is in desperate need of infrastructure improvements on water and sewer related issues, especially on some of the old pipes. Is this something we can work on, Justin?
Yeah, absolutely, Councilor. The federal money has a specific bucket for water and sewer infrastructure that is a much bigger conversation and requires a really robust conversation publicly as well as with the Water and Sewer Commission to make sure we're identifying the most needed projects. So we look forward to having that in the months ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Justin. That's an important infrastructure investment. And if the schools were here, I would tell them that we really need to invest in air conditioning and HVAC for our kids. This is very difficult to learn, very difficult to teach in this environment. But I know that's another hearing, so I'll save that. Anyway, thank you, Council Bach, and thank you to the dedicated city professionals that are here.
Great, thank you so much, Councilor Flynn. Councilor Edwards.
Thank you. I appreciate the effort of I think it's an interagency committee. I did, in reading the memo from Councilor Bach, and understanding about 10% of the funds of this $500 million is kind of met with this ERCC, right, to kind of come up with different buckets to put it in. I honestly think a lot of the allocations seem very, very low. And my concern is that you took $50 million and just, would it make more sense to pick 2 or 3 topics to kind of give the biggest wallop of that money to versus trying to spread it around so many different little things? I really wonder if the allocations are going to make a difference, if they're really going to provide the emergency relief, because there's so many buckets with so little small amounts of money going into them. I don't know that, for example, I think it was just looking at some of these numbers that I see $3 million for the recovery services, or about $3 million. And I don't know that there's any amount of lump sum of money that's going to help completely eradicate or deal with mass and cast. I know $3 million isn't going to. So, is there an like that $3 million, and you think about mass and cast, I want to know, like, hard numbers. What's it going to take to reduce half at least of those people there, right? I understand, and you talk extensively about that money, Marty, about where it's kind of going and trying to, but like $3 million specifically removing X amount of people off the street. Do we have that analysis? I think $1 million I saw for violence prevention. There's an increased amount of folks on scooters in East Boston. They now have they're meeting up at the Cube Smart run at 1A. I know that their scooter issue is still happening, I think, in Franklin Park. So there's more than $1 million worth of increase in potential violence in summer, because I think we have deep-seated mental health issues. We have kids reacting and acting out from what they've dealt with for a year in quiet and without anyone knowing. And I don't think that that's enough money. So I don't think it's enough money to deal with recovery, $3 million. I don't think $1 million over here to deal with violence is enough. What I feel is that we're trying our best to feed a lot of different things with $50 million. And what we're going to end up doing is really not getting much done. Just kind of like adding a little bit of a Band-Aid, barely even, to say like, hey, we put some money there. And that's that's my overall concern. I do appreciate, the $8 million for small business recovery. I would ask Midori if there's going to be a combination with the High Roads Kitchen. Again, I'm not interested in funding restaurants to go back to paying tip minimum wages, and that's what put a lot of those workers in poverty to begin with when they went to go get unemployment. So what are we doing to uplift as we uplift our industries? I appreciate and do absolutely love the fact that the arts are a part of our conversation. I would say if we're going to talk about putting out fires right now, though, the arts will probably get funding from other sources, possibly a bid, possibly other places that there could be streamlined millions of dollars coming in from hotels, from other developers, for so on and so forth. I don't know that right now they should be centered. If there's $3 million, I'd rather it go to recovery. So I'm not satisfied with how this $50 million is spread out. If we're talking about deep emergency, like places are on fire, trying to get over the COVID crisis that we were in the pandemic, I think you should concentrate on smaller initiatives and give a lot more money. So those are my thoughts.
I'll sort of respond high level, and then if anyone else wants to jump in on the specific points you raised, happy to turn it over. So when we were looking at the money and we were looking at sort of what our timeline was, we wanted to make sure that we were leaving space for a robust dialogue with the council and with the public. So we didn't want to spend all the money in the next 2 months, and we really wanted to let those needs develop. What we really did was try to figure out sort of what were the programs that we stood up in the last year and a half, using other resources, either through the BRF or other federal money, and really try to figure out where were the gaps that we weren't able to hit before. That the small business one is a great example of, we have $8 million worth of applications for commercial rent relief that we were unable to fill because we didn't have any other resources. That's why we picked that number. We worked very closely with everyone's team on here, whether it's the Health and Human Services side, to try to figure out what were the needs that we could stand up in a reasonable time frame, obviously hoping for swift passage by the council and actually get this dollar on the ground as soon as possible without sort of setting aside expectations for funding that may take 6 to 12 months to stand up a new program. So we really, in each of these different buckets, and I get that there's a lot of different buckets out there and there's a lot of different efforts, and we're certainly trying to touch as many areas. We really did build this as sort of what was a 3 to 6 month window that we could spend this money, and what were programs and services that were already sort of stood up or available that we could supplement. The $1 million, I think, or the $3 million you mentioned for mass and CAS or for substance misuse, those are really supplementing existing programs and services. So I think it's certainly, we'd love to put out as many dollars as we can, but we also want to be very mindful. We want to be, have a really good community process. We want to have a really good, robust process with the council before we sort of spend the money, in ways that, we can't get back at the end of the day. So I think we sort of try to take a 3 to 6 month approach on this using existing programs. And certainly there'll be gaps, and certainly there'll be areas for additional investment going forward.
That's it for me.
Midori, do you want to address the High Roads Kitchen question specifically?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Thank you, Councillor Edwards. So, you're absolutely right. And, adding on to, what Justin has said, these are emergency dollars that we could quickly sort of shovel ready to kind of, put in the pockets and hands of the small business owners on that. So with that said, we really are grateful of your partnership, over the last year and this High Roads Kitchen. I know we are going to have an update on that soon. So we'll keep you updated on where things are. But, I think this restaurant industry is something that the administration is really keeping an eye on, right? Because pre-COVID, the restaurant industry was not a good place to work, right? It's, not the hours are, always unpredictable. The wages are, usually low. And with the COVID, the health risk, are much higher than I think other industry and sectors. So we are actually, looking to convene a group of stakeholders in the restaurant hospitality industry to see, if there's anything else we can do. So sort of long term, right? So looking beyond the 3 to 6 month timeline that Justin had mentioned, and really trying to see, if there's anything the city can do to support the industry. So, we'll keep you updated on the High Roads Kitchen as we have more update on that.
How many restaurants we're paying their rent, their commercial rent? So how many restaurants?
I think we helped 38 businesses. 71% of them are minority owned. I believe about a third of them are women-owned businesses.
And paying back, this is back rent and front rent that we're paying their commercial rent with $8 million for 38 restaurants, you said?
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you were talking about the High Roads Kitchen. So the commercial rent relief fund is we're probably looking at helping 700 business owners with the rent relief fund because in the initial funding, we were able to provide $3.7 million to 350 businesses. So you kind of doubled that effort, and then we were able to double the number of businesses that were able to help. The good news is about with this commercial rent relief fund is these are already applicants that are in the pipeline, right? They have already applied, they have submitted our paperwork. So the only gap was that we just didn't have enough money to provide, when we launched this back in November. So this additional infusion of $7.5 million will allow us to close that gap immediately because these are the businesses that are still waiting for this rent relief fund from us.
And is it for back rent and front rent? Or is it just a lump sum and they can just put it to rent and we'll see what happens, or what is it?
Yeah, so the average rent is $10,000. So some are over 10,000, some are lower than 10,000. So it's any rent arrearages that they owe to the landlords. And so what the city does is we have a three-party sort of agreement in releasing this grant. So we work with landlord, we work with the business owner and the city to kind of figure out what that rent arrearages and what is the amount that makes sense to make sure that the business owners are put back on track once we provide this grant funding.
All right, and just to confirm, the $8 million that is in this emergency relief is for the rent relief.
So it's $7.5 million for commercial rent relief fund. The $8 million is a small business relief fund. So that's our flexible funding. So as businesses are opening up, we are saying we can pay for whatever you need to make sure that your business are up and running as you reopen your business.
Thank you.
Great, thank you, Councilor Edwards. I'm going to ask a few questions and then I'm going to we do have a few members of the public who have been waiting patiently to testify. And I know some of them are involved in some of the programs that are proposed here. So I'm going to let them testify and then I'll just check with councilors if folks have any follow-ups. I wanted to ask a little bit more detail. I think this is for Chief Martinez about that violence intervention funding, sort of to the point about existing programs, is it bulking up an existing program? What's that actually funding? I get the goal, but the mechanism.
Yeah, thanks, Counselor. So for that existing resources, the goal is to do two things. It's to actually expand existing programs, both slightly expand what we're able to do with SSYI and our Boston SOAR, both of which are more in the intervention lane, trying to work with more proven risk young adults and intervene in some of the challenging situations that they may be experiencing. So for both of those programs, they both want to slightly expand what they're doing and be able to reach more folks over the summer. And then the other half of that portion, then we would make accessible to the community-based organizations working same in this intervention lane. We want to make sure that those community organizations that are already reaching folks who are court involved, system involved, have gun charges, can get the resources they needed. That's who's driving some of the increase in violence. And we want to make sure that we can reach those. So that's what that funding is intended to do.
Got it. Okay, so it's split between, what's the proportion that it's split?
Half going to the two existing programs and the other half being accessible to the community-based agencies.
And the part that's going to SOAR, will that include, I know that SOAR just piloted this program where they're paying folks to do the job training. Yeah. Is that part of what it's extending?
Yeah, they're extending some of the entrepreneurship efforts that they were trying to pull on, and that includes some of that. They've had some success around that, and they want to be able to expand that going into the summer, into the fall.
Got it. Okay, and Sheila, the AOP funding, I mean, that 4.6 million is just going into our AOP fund. Is that right?
The vast majority, like I have mentioned, we are opening the door to folks that have really good land acquisitions as well. But yes, that would join the CPA money that was awarded earlier and be used primarily for the AOP program.
Got it. And in terms of that, I mean, do we feel, so speaking of Councilor Edwards' point about large things, and I do think that we have to have public conversation about the kind of big moonshot things. And so, I do think it makes sense to kind of try to figure out how to extend the programs and stuff that we need in the summer while we have those conversations. But I will just say that from my perspective, it feels like to really level up AOP, we would need kind of another order of magnitude here. And I'm curious whether from a kind of mechanism perspective, if we push in that direction of really, having the city be more aggressively in the acquisitions game, whether there's it strikes me there might be a need to kind of involve the BPDA just for kind of speed and especially when we want to do things where the city itself might acquire something that's sort of a economic purpose technically. I'm just curious where your guys' conversations on that is.
Yeah, we can't, D&D can't, as you know, or maybe you know,
I
D&D
do know.
can't purchase unless it's for a municipal purpose, right? Libraries or schools or whatever. I wish I could, but we can't. Our charter doesn't allow us. So we would need to rely on, if the city was going to make the acquisitions, and I think under certain conditions, it probably makes sense. It would have to be the BPDA.
Okay.
But I think it is, before when the city had a lot of property to get rid of, and that was our focus. That was then, this is now. And I think as we do run out of good city-owned property to develop, it is something that we need to look at very closely.
Yeah, I really think we should be using that mechanism. I mean, the BPDA is not D&D, but it is part of the city. And I think that would be a good public-oriented way to use their mechanism on AOP stuff. So just wanted to register that. Councilors, just so you know, I guess I know that we're actually going to lose a few of the chiefs in a few minutes. So I will actually, after my questions, just quickly check if anyone else has a second round before I go to public testimony. Sorry to our patient testifiers, so just have that in mind. Could you maybe, and this could be a question, Selena, is it you who's here on behalf of OFA? Could you talk like a little bit more to exactly what we're expanding on the food access front?
Yeah, I can do that.
Oh, sorry. My apologies, Chief.
No. So on the OFA front, there's basically three areas, primary areas that we're trying to expand through the Office of Food Access under the leadership of Catalina Ospina Lopez. So one is we're trying to expand an anti-stigma campaign. We've gotten so much feedback over the last year of COVID, how many people are eligible for programs and services and how many people don't access them. So this has been true pre-COVID. It was made worse during COVID. So one, there's a campaign that the office wants to launch widespread around stigma, around benefits. Two, very specifically, they're gonna purchase availability of resources to be able to do local farming, raised beds in different neighborhoods across the city for folks to access, specifically farmers of color to be able to access growing vegetables and growing efforts locally, which I think is super important. And then the third piece, which is a large piece, are community grants. This is a grant program really driven by community-led and nonprofit sort of grassroots organizations who are working to create solutions around food insecurity that may not fit in the larger efforts of community-based organizations. So it's a grant program. Those are the three primary areas with the food access. As you know, Councilor Bach, food insecurity has been a huge issue that the office has worked on nonstop through COVID, and these funds will help the immediate response that's needed.
Great. And then on the commercial rental relief, Midori, can you just speak to, I mean, you said basically you've chosen these numbers in order to like sort of fund the outstanding need that we weren't able to fund. And certainly I know with the commercial rental relief fund, I think it was just 3 million or something we did it, or 3.7, your memo says. Do we expect that 7.5 on the commercial side to basically fund all of the, there were lots of qualified applicants who didn't get funding in that first round. And I know because I heard from some of them. And so, are we going to go first to the folks who we didn't get to, but who applied? Or are we just reopening around? And the same thing with the small business thing. It mentions 500 businesses, but are we anticipating those are new applicants or kind of folks who were not met in the first round?
Yeah, so in terms of the commercial rent relief fund, we wanted to see how we can quickly deploy this funding. So we are gonna specifically focus on the ones that are ready to go, right? So we have had applications kind of waiting to be picked up, and due to the lack of funding, we weren't able to fund everyone that requested it. So we are gonna go through it, our team, and then sort of see if the needs are still the same, and if so, we can kind of quickly deploy that funding source. And if say like there is no longer a need and we have surplus, I'm sure we will be opening up to new applicants that were not in the pipeline on that one. In terms of small business relief fund, the $8 million, so this will be a brand new we will reopen it back up, but we already have an infrastructure in place to accept the application, kind of run through the sort of back end end of things to make sure that we can help in grant out the funding as quickly as we can.
Okay, thanks. And then the last thing, a more comment from me, but I'm happy to take any response from you, Midori, or others. It strikes me that one of the things that we should really be looking to do with this funding is something to creatively tackle our commercial vacancies and like local business needs. And I mean, my instinct on that is that we run some kind of a like commercial voucher program, like not permanent vouchers, maybe that's not the right word, but like something that basically like sets up small and locally owned minority women-owned businesses to like get to pay rent in some of our places where we're struggling with persistent vacancies, right? And kind of do a little bit of matchmaking on the city side. And I think we'd have to use data to do real qualification for, which landlords and where are we doing that and how much are we supporting, so it's not kind of a big rent giveaway. But it strikes me that we have a unique moment to do some of that matchmaking and get some like new anchor tenants who are those local businesses we want to support. Obviously, there's nothing on that in this yet, so I'm curious where you guys are on thinking about that.
Yeah, so I think that's a really good point, and I think a couple of things on that, right? I think in terms of vacancy, right? I think we spoke about this at the one of the budget hearings that I presented. We currently don't have real sort of time data on the commercial vacancy. So we're working with the BPDA research team to sort of acquire some of this so that we can kind of keep track of what are some vacancies that are coming up on that. I do think, the major goal of the commercial rent relief fund is to make sure that we target the hardest hit industries. We support small business owners to stay in the neighborhoods, places. But you're absolutely right. I think, once we get through this, initial 3 to 6 months with this rapid response, Sheila Dillon mentioned earlier about the conversation we had with Chinatown land trust folks. We're just looking at other creative means to, for commercial acquisition, affordability options, and making sure that we really, help small businesses stay and grow here in Boston. So, we'll love to kind of continue the conversation and hear more ideas and what else we can be doing on this front.
Okay, great, thank you. I wanted, before we lose folks, I do want to leave my council colleagues a chance if there's any follow-up questions. I know Councilor Flaherty has been here throughout and is just going to defer, I think, further questions. Councilor Flaherty, that's all right?
Yes, that's it, Madam Chair. No further questions. I actually have a 4:30 Zoom, so I'm going to depart in a moment or two, but just want to emphasize just coordinating and scheduling and partnering moving forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Flaherty. Councilor Braden?
Just a really quick question. The Boston Resiliency Fund was targeted, and one of the benefits of it was that it was able to help folks, immigrants who were maybe undocumented, who were not necessarily eligible for federal funding or for federal assistance. Will this bucket of money be able to help those folks, or how are we getting around that federal restriction, or has that federal restriction been lifted?
I can speak a little bit to that. It's certainly something that we're very mindful of. This administration definitely seems to be more flexible about it, but we still want to set up barriers, as Selena mentioned earlier, by going through nonprofit partners. And under UC Valley's leadership, we've been having some good conversations with Denver, Austin, some other cities around the country to just validate the approach and make sure that we're creating safeguards that work for our immigrant families. So we're working really closely with other cities on that who've also learned from this experience to ensure that we're using federal funds in a way that can support families, but also keep them safe.
Thank you. I think that answers my question, because we don't want to see our immigrant families, so many of them are essential workers. We don't want to see them not getting the assistance that they need. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much, Councilor Braden. Any last quick questions, Councilor Mejia? Councilor Flynn?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Councilor Bach. I just had a quick question. I think it would be for Midori. If I have the wrong person, I apologize. Regarding the money spent on tourism, encouraging people to come to Boston, I watched that video. Video of the advertisement of welcoming people to Boston. I didn't see much in there on Chinatown. I was wondering if we are targeting visitors throughout the country and overseas to come to Boston to visit Chinatown. I would like that to be part of the tourism plan for the city of Boston. I thought, in my opinion, it was not captured this time. I had a kickoff on Saturday welcoming people back to Chinatown. It was a small number of people that came, but we're going to do it every Saturday for the month of June. But what are your thoughts about including Chinatown as part of the tourism campaign?
Yeah, absolutely. So we have been pretty intentional about including, all of the neighborhoods of Boston. We do actually have sort of neighborhood-based campaign materials. So I'm happy to circle back and send that over to you. And in addition to that, the All-Inclusive Boston campaign, we have a website which is housed by the Greater Boston Convention and Visitors Bureau. So if you go into that website, allinclusiveboston.com, I think, that you see like the AAPI sort of owned businesses, right? You see Black owned businesses, Latinx businesses, and then you can kind of also do a neighborhood by neighborhood businesses and kind of find out, where to go, right? As tourists and visitors are figuring out, what they want to do while they're here. So, but you're absolutely right. I think with this additional $1 million in funding, we'll be able to amplify more on all the neighborhood businesses, including Chinatown. So we'll be happy to work with you on that to make sure that we do that.
Thank you. If we can talk offline, I'm working with the group that's trying to have an Asian volleyball tournament that would have several thousand people to Boston. They would play at the BCEC next year. Could you help me with that? I'm having a little bit of trouble arranging it with BCEC for some reason, but I think I would need some assistance from the mayor's office to make sure that they know, BCEC knows it's a priority for us to bring a couple thousand tourists into Boston.
Absolutely. Yeah, happy to. So I'll work with Chantal and our IGR team to connect with you.
Counselor, as a board member on the MCCA, I'm happy to follow back up with you as well.
That would be excellent. That'd be excellent. Thank you. I appreciate that. Thank you, Councilor Block.
Great. Thank you, Councilor Flynn. Councilor Edwards, any second round?
Nope.
Okay, great. Okay. I think that's all of our councilors who are remaining. And I know we have some administration folks who have to hop off at 4:30. Thank you to everybody, all of the chiefs for coming today and for the work that's led up to this proposal, and to councilors for your questions. And we'll continue to discuss and just, I think it's a big, as I said at the start, there's a lot of different things that we're measuring here, and I appreciate the kind of distinction around the emergency funding. And I know that council will work with alacrity to figure out how to get some of that money out on the street, even as we also sort of weigh these bigger picture things. So appreciate all of you. And with that, I'm going to go to public. Sorry, actually, Chief Sterrett, did you want to say anything before I go to public testimony?
Nope, just appreciate the collaboration, appreciate all the chiefs for being here and their staffs for putting this thoughtful proposal together, and happy to follow up there for any additional questions after the hearing. Thank you.
Great. Yes, appreciate that. And I'm sure there will be, and we'll continue to collaborate on this. All right. So with that, I'm going to go.
Madam Chair, we've lost your mic.
Oh, thank you. Thank you all. Okay. Sorry about that. So thank you. And with that, I'm going to go to public testimony. Speaking of Chinatown, I'm going to start with Lydia Lowe from the Chinatown Land Trust. Lydia, you have the floor, and thank you, and sorry to keep you waiting.
Oh, thank you. And Sorry, I wasn't prepared to be on so soon. Yeah, so this has been a really informative hearing. I want to thank you for holding it. And I just want to underscore that as we emerge from the pandemic, this is a particularly important moment for property acquisition. In the year that preceded the pandemic, there were 908 units, or 87% of Boston multifamily units sold were cash sales. And the average price for a cash sale was $598,667 per unit. Yet our acquisition opportunity program, which is a great program, but the funding, our funding level is $75,000 to $100,000 per unit. So I think with this influx of ARPA funding coming to Boston, we should really seize this opportunity as a transformative moment for the city, in which we can really take a stand for housing as a human right, and take more homes off of the market and increase socially owned, permanently affordable housing that can really keep families and communities here for generations to come. And as has been mentioned, this property acquisition, it's a very important strategy to keep residents in their homes, but it's also an important strategy in this moment for small business stabilization, when we're really seeing these storefronts shuttered in our neighborhoods. So previously, Mayor Walsh had set a goal of 1,000 units, housing units off the market by 2030. But I think that we should be seizing this opportunity with the federal dollars to get to that 1,000 unit goal a lot faster, maybe by 2024 instead. So I'm here to support the $4.6 million that's already proposed in the $50 million budget for acquisition. But to say that, as we move forward and look at the rest of the $450 million that's coming into Boston, we should really look at immediately tripling the acquisition funding for acquisition opportunity program and tripling that allowable subsidy to really meet the market situation. Because we no longer have naturally occurring affordable housing. Actually, our housing, it's in disrepair due to disinvestment. It's expensive due to the luxury housing boom and gentrification, and we're trying to serve low-income people. So those are kind of three strikes against us in terms of making it affordable. But I think this is a really unique opportunity again. And I also would encourage, in particular, increasing the funding for AOP and creating a special fund for community land trusts to be able to move more quickly and creatively in this area, because this is something that we're particularly focused on. And there are many ways to approach it, but there's not a lot of available financing to do the kind of work that we're trying to do. So thank you very much.
Great, thank you so much, Lydia. Next up is Phil Giffey, and then it will be, who I believe is from NOAA, and then we'll have Meredith Levy, who I believe is from, BNCLT, which I suspect is another land trust. Sorry that I'm mixing up the acronyms at the moment. So now, yes, I was right. All right, great. We're going to Phil first. Phil, you have the floor.
Yeah, thank you, Councilor. Thank you, everybody, and my colleagues as well. It's great to be here to speak on behalf of AOP, which I just want to remind people that is an anti-displacement program primarily for low-income people who are basically essential workers who are often victims of COVID, whom we help a lot. And to my left, I want to introduce Mel Nelson, who is our Director of Property Management, who spends a lot of time on the repairs and working directly with the residents themselves. So I also want to, Lydia's idea of spending more money on particular items would be helpful. I know that we can't take all 50 million for East Boston, but I'd be willing to take half that if that's what you want to make a deal and work hard on that. So we'll take 25 million, and that probably still isn't enough as Lydia and others knows, for any of their neighborhoods that we're all working on. So I would say whatever we can get for AOP, we need it. And I'm sure Sheila would agree, and we'd be happy to have more than 4.6 million. We'll take whatever we can get because we need it. NOAA has done 55 units in 18 buildings in the past couple of years. We're finding it increasingly expensive, as I know my colleagues are, to try to acquire the 3-deckers, which are now well over $1 million for 3-deckers. And they've got to be in pretty good shape when you acquire those. So we need money faster, actually more money per unit, so we can move with alacrity and keep people in the units. Because again, this isn't just an acquisition program, it's also an anti-displacement program. At the same time, we've used Boston resiliency funds of about 165,000, another 100,000 of our own money, and I think we've served, several thousand families through the food relief program we work on in order to help many of the people who've been displaced, unemployed, have been affected by COVID in crowded conditions in a lot of these units. So I can't say enough about AOP. I think DND does a very good job. We'd like to tweak it here and there. I think Sheila knows that, but we'd be happy to take as much money as we could possibly get for AOP and any other housing program into which you want to allocate it. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much. And Phil, before you go, the example of the 55 units in 18 buildings,
yes.
What's the average gap funding that you're all told that you're needing for those? Do you have any sense?
Well, we like I said, if we can only get, give or take, 100,000 per unit, we basically have to get a mortgage of about 700,000 or so to get a property. That's not easy. That's really stretching it. We don't get much of a fee out of this. We defer currently half of our fee anyway. And then since the tenant rents are really subsidized for a period of time, we have to do refinancing, which we're about to do with the city. And I want to thank Sheila for a recent letter supporting that. But even when we do this program, it's not a permanent solution because we have to then go back in a couple of years and refinance because the debt we actually have to pay is much more significant. We're competing with the private market. We pay near private market prices for these buildings in order to keep people there. The debt is give or take $700,000 per unit. We carry that risk. For us, it's one of our highest priorities. It's a mission-driven program. You would not run this as a business program. It doesn't work as a business program. It only works as a mission-driven program. And even that, the organization's at risk. So we need as much money as we can, more per unit. We need more rehab because the city also wants to, as you all know, to make units sustainable and resilient over time. So as we want to get these buildings and units, we've got to bring them up to code, not just housing code, but also resiliency and sustainability built into each one. And I'm sure my colleagues would agree with that. We all want to make them as good as possible, not just to get a little building acquired, and then over time, you've got a lot of older buildings in need of repairs.
Got it. Yeah, no, that makes sense. Although I think there is a tension between, I think to some extent, as we stabilize the naturally occurring, quote unquote, affordable housing stock with a program like this, because it's not so naturally occurring anymore, we can't spend all the money on bringing every unit in that stock up to super state because the reality is we just won't save as many as we need to.
I agree. I understand perfectly.
So it's but no, really appreciate your testimony and would love to dig in more with you and with Lydia and others about sort of what that per unit number is that we need right now.
We'll get you some numbers. Thank you.
Yeah, that would be great. And Mal, I had let you into the Zoom room, but I assume because you're here, you don't need me to separately recognize you to testify.
Yeah, thank you. So like Phil said, we've acquired about 55 units, and the issue again is just bringing these buildings up to code, and sort of the funding issue where we have where we're trying to bring these buildings up to code, just not having enough money to meet certain requirements of the building outside of the health and safety things that we're doing and the resiliency that we're trying to implement. So we're looking for constant programs like Mass Save or any other energy efficient programs that are out there to try to help with the funding so we can make these energy upgrades to the property. But that's been sort of the difficult portion of trying to get these buildings where they need to be as far as efficiency and
lead paint money helps too, Counselor. So
definitely.
Great. Well, thank you both for the testimony. And now I'll be going to Meredith Levy. Meredith.
Thank you. Great to be here. It was a really informative couple of hours. I'm from Boston Neighborhood Community Land Trust. I'm the executive director there. Our geographic territory is Mattapan, Roxbury, and Dorchester, primarily along the Fairmount Quarter and beyond. The population that we serve, we're formerly COHIF, you might know us as COHIF, the Coalition for Occupied Homes and Foreclosure. We changed to a land trust 2 years ago, yeah. And in our time as COHIF, we acquired a few more, but we have 6 buildings, which covers 15 units, and we've since acquired a couple more buildings, so we now have 21 units. And, you know, we just acquired properties through AOP. Very, very thankful to have the AOP program. I agree with the previous speakers that it's a great program and we need it, but it's not quite enough. We still have this gap, and we can't really cross subsidize because we're a small organization. And yet our whole mission is all about going into these small properties where others aren't going, you know, going into the nooks and crannies and trying to keep people in their homes. The other thing is we're really trying to keep people who are at the ELI and the extremely low income and the very low income level, which is 30 to 50%. And quite frankly, if you plug the numbers in, and if you do 100,000, you know, more or less subsidy from AOP, and you try to keep the rents at 50% or below, you can't get the debt coverage you can't even get, Phil mentioned a $700,000 mortgage, but you can't even get it from a lending institution because you don't have the coverage. So we have to come up with other ways. We don't have the deep pockets to do, but what we're doing, we've proven we can do. We've done it. We've got a model. So we want to be able to do it. We work closely with a lot of organizations on the ground to work with tenants who are at extreme risk of getting pushed out. So this is an anti-displacement strategy. And I can tell you, I've only been in this organization for 1.5 years, but I get tons of calls. Can you acquire this property? And I've made several offers, even in our short term. And a lot of times I'm not able to get to that level. I haven't gotten acceptances on several of the offers I've made simply because we can't quite reach, and yet we need to reach because these are the properties where tenants are organized and would like to be part of our land trust model. In addition just to having long-term permanent, 99-year affordability, this model also allows them to have control of how it's run. So it's a really great model. We can show that because we're really dedicated to having our residents pay no more than 30% of their income on housing. If we were able to do that, we'd have some statistics. We could say right now, typically people are spending 45% of their incomes on housing among the group that we serve. If everybody in that group were able to save that 15%, that would be like a $9,000 annual savings that could be put to so many other things to help stabilize their own lives, healthcare, food, all kinds of things, quality of life for their families. So it's a great model. We just need to be able to support it. So we know that our communities are getting really hit hard, COVID, everything else. And whether it's a foreclosure crisis as it was, or we might see another foreclosure crisis coming up, whether it's gentrification, whether it's COVID, all these things hits the same people. And we have to really make sure we're not just sending people to other new affordable housing, but we're letting people stay in their homes where they have social networks. These are perfectly good buildings. Lydia mentioned statistics of the cash sales. We also know that from that same research that 74% of the buildings that were sold were under 10 units, primarily for condo conversion. And Dorchester is one of 2 neighborhoods that have had the highest number of condo conversions for the 2 and 3 triple-decker homes or 2 and 3 family homes that we see. So we know things are changing quickly. We are up against Wall Street, and investors are ready to sweep up, and especially for landlords who are struggling and they're not able to make rent or collect enough rent. These properties are prone to be sold quickly. So we are here, we are ready. We would love to be able to do this work. It's building. More organizations like ours are springing up. We just need the resources. So we absolutely think this is the right moment to try to use the resources to do. It's kind of a land banking strategy, both Kenzie, you had asked before about city acquisitions, but also among these organizations where we share a similar alliance in our mission. This is a moment for us to try to take these properties off the speculative market so that they can be affordable for years and years to stabilize our communities. We absolutely support the $4.6 million for AOP, and And of course, it would be great to have that be an annual allocation, or, you know, to have that number be even higher. I agree with Lydia that if we could increase our per unit acquisition number, if we could triple it, that would be amazing. So thank you for giving me this opportunity to speak. Thank you so much for all the good work and the hard thinking that's clearly going into this.
Great, thank you so much, Meredith. And thank you to the whole land trust community. I mean, I definitely agree. It's a really important piece of the approach, and COHIF's great. So glad to know you by your new name. Sorry about that. All right, well, I think that that's everyone we have here to testify. And so without, I think, any further ado, I am going to adjourn this hearing of the Ways and Means Committee. Thank you all, and have a good evening.
Recording stopped.